Hi everyone, Shane here. Just getting in at the top of the podcast to let you know that there are some minor audio issues, unfortunately, with this recording. It will begin around 40 to 45 minutes in and end about 1 hour 45 in of the cast. It's just a case of certain bits of Doc's audio dropping out. It doesn't seem too bad from what I've noticed while I've been editing, but it is noticeable nonetheless, so I thought I'd let you know about that in advance. It should hopefully be fixed for next time. Apologies that this has come about. But anyway, without further ado, Flag.
We are going to have to act if we want to live in a different world.
Hello friends, welcome ladies, gentlemen, and NBs to the first episode of What Are We Desho's Request Line. I am the Subtle Doctor as per usual, and along for the ride with me, as per usual, is the hardest working man in pod business and the most patient friend to deal with technical issues that I've had. It's Shadon.
It's, I'm more patient here than I ever am in work about actual work-related technical issues. Like, you're all seeing the sunnier side of me here, everyone, honestly. I would also like to mention, by the way, you said about the hardest working man in pod business, this, we call this now the request line, but what this really should be called is the tardy catch-up podcast list. Because I apologise profusely for not doing this much sooner. I offer no excuses for other than I've just been very, very bad at it. Because what we're going to be covering today is something that I should have done months ago. And yeah, my bad on that. I do apologise for it. But nonetheless, hopefully we can bring some interesting insights to what we're going to be covering today and just have a good joke about it as well. I'm still going to be cracking a few things here and there.
Well, first of all, before I address your comments, your needless self-flagellation.
It's fine.
I want to say thank you to NavyCherub for calling in the request line. And
Indeed.
requesting that we cover this particular anime. Because he's a patron, he knew the secret phone number to call, and so he went into the secret phone booth that we directed him to, and he called in and clandestinely delivered his request onto the voice machine, the answer phone that we keep here at the What Are We Desho offices for the request line. And because he followed proper procedure, we're now going to cover the anime that he requested, which is Flag. But
when you were describing him then, like going into the phone booth, all I could think was that you were about to reveal he was a member of the Wild Stallions.
Well, I mean, I didn't want to say that, but now that you've done it, it's out in the open, so...
That's not so excellent, is it?
Direct all your complaints to Shadon, David. Your secret was safe with me, but somebody blabbed it, so...
Sorry.
Look. We listen. We learned lessons in our first year of Patreon, and that is that us doing solo audio essays is a thing that, while possible, is extremely difficult for us for various different reasons. Some of which involve schedule, some of which involve emotional energy. And, we're not great at it. And this doesn't just go for you, it goes for me. I mean, I didn't do nearly as many as you did. And we're going to be playing catch up with the backlog that's been requested of me as well. And, I guess people like when we discuss things also. Our discussion format is loved by some people. So we figured we'd go with that. We're slightly better at that than we are at making audio essays by ourselves. So that's what we're going to do. And I think it's a good change. I think that we're going to deliver a banger here today and going forward with these. Because there's a lot to talk about with this particular anime, Shadon. I know you have a lot to say.
Oh boy. Oh boy, do I. All I can keep thinking back to is when I was doing preparation for this, because I didn't just completely leave this covering Flag, in the dust. I did do some prep and some writing for it, and as part of that, I remember reading Ferren Martin's A&N review of the show from shortly after it actually came out on Blu-ray, if I recall correctly, or even DVD at the time of its release. Just like back in 2007, I think. It was around that time, and this was after I'd watched the show, and I remember reading Ferron's review, and I was just like, this is a good review, but I don't agree with it.
Right.
And it's not even that I don't agree with the points that they made. I'm saying they because I don't know what gender or pronouns, but you get the point.
Theron is he, him.
Okay, there we go. So I don't know like what, like, sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied. Like, I like, when I read Ferron's review, I was like, okay, look, I'm not even like disagreeing with the points right now. I just think that there's an element that was missed in it that I feel kind of made it difficult for me to like this show. And it's not even like anything that's actually in it that's like a problem. It's not like I can point to this moment and say, well, this character did something that was completely stupid and out of place and it just kind of ruined the thing. Or, they started using racial slurs. No, that happened. I will get to... I will get to that later. But yeah, it's been an interesting one watching this show. And then also like reading up about after the facts, particularly from that review. Worth checking out, by the way. It's still on A&N's website, even though it's from like, what might as well have been 200 years ago at this point, because time doesn't mean anything anymore. It really doesn't. Yeah. But yeah, like, so Flag, like this came from David and I watched it and I'll get to it later, but like this show is very unique.
Oh, entirely unique in anime.
It's very unique, and for the reasons that it is unique alone, it is worthwhile existing and possibly even watching. I say possibly for, again, I'm being like cryptic and coy as is my one.
I guess it's possibly worth watching.
Well, I'll get to that. But
that's interesting though, because like this is I think that like you asked me off mic if I enjoyed it, and like that I think requires unpacking because of what you're talking about. Because it is a show that I think some people could maybe view it as a little bit of a distant or a cold show, but like which I would totally disagree with based on the second half of the thing. It's the storytelling is such a unique thing about it that I feel like that's gonna be a lot of what we talk about is the storytelling mechanism and its efficacy or lack thereof, depending on your point of view, because that is the thing that sets this show apart from all other anime. Really, it's the only show of its kind to use this sort of storytelling technique, and I believe it's all the better for it. But I will save that for when we get into our thing. We got to set it up first. So so I will do that here. Flag. What is Flag? I should say, by the way, at the top of this that we're going to be as spoiler free as possible for as long as we can. Like up until maybe the midway-ish point of the cast, and then the gloves will be off and we'll be talking about everything, but we'll let you know. We'll give you fair warning. So, Shadon, let's talk about what this thing is, Flag here. So this is a 2006-2007 original net animation. This was not a TV show or straight to video. It was straight to the internet. TV show.
Which in 2006, I have to say, is like crazy when you think about it. I mean, we currently like in, the year of our Lord, or, of Satan, really, 2020, let's be honest, that's what this year is. It is the year of hell. Yes. We take streaming services for granted. If I want to watch anything, really, I can 9 out of 10 times just literally go to one of various services I'm subscribed to and get a hold of it. If I considered doing that back in 2006, I probably wouldn't have bothered, or it certainly wouldn't have been as anywhere near as convenient as it is now. So, yeah, the fact that was even a thing, like, back in 2006 is kind of crazy to me. But, hey, why not?
Yeah, I would assume that it was not streamable I would assume is like a direct download sort of thing. But I haven't done the research
No,
on the availability.
According to my notes, it actually was streamable. It was pay-per-view.
Oh, yes. Right. So, like, I remember there's been other, like, shows that were released this way too. Like, I think there was a Saint Seiya arc that was released on pay-per-view. What a weird thing, anime pay-per-view. It's just
there's not even any wrestling in it. Come on.
No, that is definitely a wrestling term for me. The pay-per-view.
I knew you'd appreciate
definitely. That. So okay, so what this show is like? I think first and foremost, it is a war drama. It's a I think though as anime fans we might tend to think of it as a mecha series. And it certainly does feature giant robots, a handful of them. But I don't know. It's the mecha, unlike
I have an idea.
Unlike stuff like Gundam or even Macross, the mecha don't feel like characters at all. This is a very on the real robot side of things.
Yeah.
So, but it does have them, and if you are a mecha nerd, I think that there's a lot for you here. It appeals to that sort of niche otaku that I've talked about before. That is definitely like an old-time otaku, rather than the late 90s, early aughts sort of vision of it. The otaku type that was interested in the caliber of bullet that was being used, and there's all these schematics and specific numbers, how much pounds per square inch could the leg supports handle, or how
many
much
cup holders do the mechs have? You will learn all of that in Flag. Flag is rigorous in its own made up detail of how these robots work and what they can and cannot do. And that also goes in some way towards it, the robots run into problems. They have mechanical issues. As you say, it comes across as very grounded. It's not the case of, my jet got blown up, we'll just magically whisk one up and put between episodes, off screen, we get one in via mail order, it's fine. No, that when things break in this show, they break properly, and there are consequences, and it takes time for them to be fixed. So that's nice. I was going to say, though, Doc, if I had to describe this show, you've done a wonderful job there, don't get me wrong, but I have already concluded that this is basically what you get if you combine the Blair Witch Project with D-Dust from Counter-Strike.
Yeah, this is what I was going to get to as well, is that, it is... You could almost, Blair Witch, right, is a found footage horror film, and you could almost call this a found footage anime, because, again, unlike any other show, I would say 97 to 98% of it is either a photo that someone has taken, footage from cameras people have taken, or audio video recordings of a user interface on some machine. And that's it. That's our window into the world. And
imagine if you made an anime using only TikTok.
Why would you say that? Why would you say that?
Am I wrong though? I'm not hearing a counter to my point there. So though, that's the problem, dog.
I'm not sure what the point is, other than that would just be hellish and sad, and I mean amusing, but also sad. If the point is that it is a subjective sort of or sort of the perspective on the events that occur is limited and biased and everything like that, then that's absolutely true, because that's the sort of nature of documentary. And I think it's actually better to call this a splicing together of two different documentaries than found footage.
Definitely,
because you actually do have one of the characters narrating over the top of documentary pieces that he is not present for, because he is the one putting together all this footage and all these photos into some sort of historical document, some kind of record of things that he, for his own reasons, wants kept intact.
The prototype of the YouTube response essay.
What if it was just like, I'm here to call out the United Nations.
The United Nations is shit, and here's why.
And here's why. Right. But that's like the framing of the story. Like, so the story itself is about chiefly this photographer called Saiko Shirasu, who is like happens to be in this country, this made up like Central Asian country called Udiana. And
I thought it was more Middle Eastern myself.
Yeah,
but it's close enough that I suppose it could kind of be either.
I think if I'm not mistaken, the wiki, or I read Central Asian somewhere, right? But like it interchangeable in some ways, I think. But like it is sort of mountainous. There are some mountains there, which I feel like are more Central Asian. I don't know geography.
Well, I'm thinking. Well, the funny thing is, like, I think we'd be in the wrong if we didn't mention, of course, again that this was made in 2006, and that's not a lot of time immediately following both the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, from everything that I've read and from what I've discussed with people, including David himself, NavyCherub, it's not meant to be a direct analogy to Iraq or Afghanistan.
It doesn't seem that way.
No, but I think it would also be impossible to avoid those events playing into this in some way or another.
Oh yeah,
particularly in terms of media narrative, which we will get to, because there's a dichotomy between the two narratives that run through the actual story. Even though you've got one gentleman spliced together, it's very clear, to me, that there is a distinction between what one person's footage is capable of showing versus what the others does.
Oh, I totally agree.
That's spoiler territory. Though, so we will save that. But yeah, I think that it's kind of on the... Sorry, go on.
Oh, it maybe spoilerish, but also I think important to point out because it is an indicator of the quality of this production in terms of its attention to those kind of details. It's not just the robots that get attention to detail. It is the fact that both documentarians, their styles of documenting and photography come through as unique to them in the production. And so it helps, excuse me, it helps lend something to their character. It helps kind of inform and play off of the philosophies of photography that they both have and that they both discuss throughout the thing. And yeah, it again is just showing that the show is a sort of subtle work and is interested in details that require a certain type of engagement from the audience that are not sort of shouted over the top at you, shown in battle style.
Yep, that's right. But I think I should also, again, just kind of dance around the issue, which is to say that you are correct in that it does demand a certain kind of...
You must wait. You must not.
I'm restraining myself, honestly. I've been holding these points in for 6 months, Doc. I gotta get them out. But, when you say, that this show demands a certain kind of engagement from the audience, I 100% agree with you. But I am going to say ahead of time, for reasons that I will explain specific to me, if you are not willing or don't want to give the show that kind of engagement, I actually don't blame you. This show, I'm going to argue, is not for everyone. Although I would also simultaneously argue that I think people should at least give it a try.
Yeah.
Not even necessarily to watch it all the way through, just so you can see first. I mean, we're describing this over a podcast. We're not even doing this live stream. So talking about how this show is framed and that it is all through the camera, through these recordings, through cameras and photographs and such, often very first person view, in a way that almost reminds me daftly enough of stuff like Peep Show. But and that actually plays a part into like giving the characters some fleshing out of their own, like who they're paying the most attention to when they're not even realizing it, which I'll talk about later.
Totally.
But yeah, like this show is not for everyone, and like giant robots like fighting in a desert in a civil war, like that alone, like you'd think would be neat and cool. And the way Flag does that is, in my opinion, but it's not conventionally neat and cool. That's the thing. Like, this is not a conventional show.
Yeah, and I'm about to touch on what you just touched on pretty soon here, and it is important to note that like that stuff doesn't even begin to happen until halfway through the anime, and that's important.
Yep.
That is an important point, based on like what the show purports itself to be and its goals and what it's trying to do. But we always do in these non-spoiler parts, we get ahead of ourselves. So Shirasu, right, she's a photographer, she's hanging out in Udiana, and it's this war-torn country. The UN is there, their peacekeeping forces there trying to help things. They're doing not a great job, but
what a surprise. What a surprise that the UN are doing a bad job.
Oh, slander the United Nations. I can't believe it.
Oh, what are they going to do? Send me a threatening letter?
Right,
Ooh,
yes.
woo, 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 woo. Oh my god, what are we going to do? Oh no.
My goodness. Yeah, they're not doing the best, but like the two sides of the conflict are like, I think, sort of getting close to negotiating, or like it's on the table, though sort of like a pipe dream. But then like something incredible happens. Like the side that is for, I guess, like one of the sides of the conflict that is like, I don't know, for unification or peace, ultimately, or whatever, like they have a flag for Udiana, and or maybe it's just the flag, like the country's flag. I'm not sure, but like this. Do you remember the origin of the flag itself? Because I'm struggling to recall like exactly why the flag itself was made. Is it a new flag, or is it just the nation's flag?
I think it might potentially be the UN, or what is meant to be a version of the UN flag, not the actual countries. Because the scene, basically what happens here is that a town square, I think, is reclaimed, and Shirasu is there photographing it, and she manages to capture the moment in which the flag is actually hoisted on top of the town hall or the presidential palace, whatever it is, which, as it's being hoisted, like actually catches some people in silhouette behind it.
So cool.
And yeah, and this single photograph that she takes and publishes, like, has a galvanizing effect on the peace process in Udiana, and like the flag itself becomes a symbol of that peace process. It's like gained a lot of new meaning as a result of this like single slice of time, of this moment of history. I mean, I think what Flag is trying to do in its own way with this moment is to give you some idea of like the value of it. Think of this as like the Tiananmen Square, like, you know, guy standing in front of a tank. That kind of impact of a photograph. That's, I think, the level it's trying to aim for inside its own fictional universe.
Yeah, and what a fictional universe. Because those aren't just two random people that the sun pouring through the flag allows the shadowy silhouettes to be in the photo.
No, they're not.
One of the people that's praying is called the Kufura, which is sort of the leading figure in one of the religious sects that make up the country. Like, it's the sort of more, the country has a couple of different religions that are kind of competing, if not in the open, then definitely in the in the shadows. And the Kufra is,
I mean, we can draw parallels between that Shia and Sunni sects of Islam, for example.
Sure. And if I knew more about it, then I would talk more about it, but I just feel so uninformed to speak on that.
That is admittedly where my knowledge also ends. But again, you can kind of draw parallels, even though it is a fictionalized country with a fictionalized religion, how there are internal conflicts that play out in other nations across the world, not even just Iraq and Iran. I could mention, for example, Israel, about, you know, divisions between religion. It is a big player for political power, and of course, religious leadership is a big part of what happens in Flag and the conflict that drives it.
Totally. And the Kufra is like a sort of sacred figure who like remains virginal until she like begins to get her period, and at that point a new child is chosen as the Kufra to be sort of, again, sacred, virginal, someone who spends all their time silent and in prayer. And the other religion in the city, or the country rather, is called the Gelut, and it's led by this guy called is it RuPaul? Not RuPaul. It's like RuPaul or Ro.
Yeah, I'm very. Oh God. Yeah, but we'll just say Ru because yeah,
something like that. But so he's sort of meant to like be. People think he's like the reincarnation of Buddha, and but the origin of the religion is actually like a death cult. And it's like an interesting like thing about the show in that like I think Akagi, who's the other main character, says like that often the history of this country is sort of wrapped up in legends, and you can find like in these like seemingly like off the wall legends of Udiana like actual history about the culture and the country itself, and that's really neat. And I mentioned Akagi. Akagi is Shirasu's senpai. Was her like I don't know if he was her boss for a while. I think he did hire her at one point, but during the show,
I think he taught her some of the stuff that she knows as well.
Yeah, during the show that she's not working for him, but. Anyway, so Shirasu, like you said, takes this incredible photo, and it has this amazing effect on the peace process. It brings people together. It brings the two sides to the negotiating table, and she acquires a little bit of fame such that the United Nations brings her in a symbolic gesture into their sort of task force to document the task force goings on. And so she becomes this embedded journalist who is like, yeah, just there interviewing, photographing, looking at the base and really the people on the base, getting to know them and their motivations as human beings, what drives them, what they're like, and them also getting to know her. And it's in the way it plays out very slowly, methodically, kind of wrapped me up in it. And so I wasn't particularly like, oh man, when are we going to get to the Shutans, right? Because this is like I have in my notes here that Flag is a true war anime. And what I mean by that is so often anime that use war as a vehicle to tell stories, like war feels very kind of like a two-dimensional prop. And
it's the Gundam cool robot meme.
Right, the Gundam problem is like going to be a central thing in our talking about this show, right? Like but kind of war in Flag is very are you familiar with the theory of evolution called punctuated equilibrium, Shadon?
I am not, but will this be on the test?
It
Should
will
I be taking
yes,
notes?
Definitely take notes.
Shit. Oh god, I usually sleep through class. But no, please enlighten me. Please enlighten me.
So, I think it's a like normal kind of viewing natural selection, right? Is that like evolution is kind of gradually happening pretty regularly over time, but punctuated equilibrium, the theory behind that is like for thousands of years perhaps there will be no evolution, and then some kind of big environmental change will happen which will cause very relatively to the 1,000 years of nothing rapid evolution over a short period of time. And sorting,
man, I hope that isn't happening right now.
Yeah, right. Like, so sorting the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. And then once all the, not that there's a hand at play, but that's sort of effectively what's happening. Not that there's a guiding hand happening, but then, you know.
Well, I'm glad for that, because currently where we're going at the moment, like, you know, we're living in the SimCity 2000 game where all of the disasters have been triggered simultaneously.
Yes, Bowser is coming for us soon, I think.
Giant spider UFO.
What is that real in SimCity?
Yeah, that's a thing.
Man, I haven't played that 2000 yet. I should. It's supposed to be the best one. Certainly better than the 2013 Dripe that EA offered up that time. Do you ever play that?
Well, I see it. No, I didn't play it because I don't tend to want to give money to EA if I can help it.
All right. Anyway, getting back to why I brought up punctuated equilibrium, because that is sort of almost the model of war that Flag shows us, that there's long periods of quiet, long periods of kind of mentally stewing in your own juices, training, retraining, prep, tweaking the technology, and then rapid, terrifying, awful bursts of combat. And then as quickly as it begins, it's over. And then there's a long period of quiet once again. And that, I feel, is a lot more kind of, at least from what I know of modern warfare, from what I've read through news stories and what have you, is a lot more true to the experience of war in the 20th/21st century than, at least pre-drone warfare, I'll say, than like something like even like 8th MS Team in Gundam, which purports to be like the most sort of realistic kind of Gundam show in that regard. This gets more to like the accurate picture that you're talking about, the Gulf War and the Iraq War and that sort of thing. And it felt like a lot more like this, me reading about it, than other war stories.
I will say this off the bat, actually, is something that I will definitely give Flag a lot of credit for. There's a lot of fiction out there that tends to be very military positive. Even stuff like, I've been recently replaying Halo, that's guilty of that. Call of Duty, you name it. Like, I'm mentioning video games specifically here, but there are, of course, like a lot of American films like Transformers. I mean, Transformers 2, giant robot stuff like said Middle East later on, like, yeah, that is all pro-military fetish bullshit, basically. What I appreciate about Flag, especially given the time in which it was released, and I think this might potentially be part because it was, of course, made by someone who was Japanese, grew up in Japan. Japan has a very different relationship with the military. I don't even really have one. I just have the self-defense force. I really appreciate how, especially given the time in which this was created, how it was willing to be critical of Western intervention in countries like those depicted in Udiana. Because now with the benefit of history and hindsight, we, of course, well, I mean, not even that, people knew at the time that Iraq and, Afghanistan were fucking sham wars.
Yeah.
But, obviously that's an opinion that's become more mainstream over time, which it really should have been. It should have been the default by, before it even fucking happened, or it never happened at all. But point being, nonetheless, is that Flag is critical of interventionism like this from a Western perspective, and very critical in turn also of how media can be controlled to portray a certain narrative, which is something I want you to put a pin in for generally what this show teaches you. This show, I think, like I say, you may not necessarily enjoy it, but it will definitely educate you. And not even necessarily about I'm not even talking giving you an idea of, hey, the West intervening in Middle Eastern nations and their own internal conflicts is stupid and they shouldn't fucking do it. I'm talking more in terms of just being aware of how narratives are constructed both in fiction and outside of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of praise to be given for what this show just teaches you, that being a part of it, and also for its bravery at the time it was made and saying, hey, you know what, going into Middle Eastern nations, to try and sort things out because we're holier than thou. Let's not fucking do that. Might be an idea. Although I'm sure someone will be quick to point, well, actually, Japan did send some troops over to Iraq. Oh, for fuck's sake. So I didn't look that up beforehand, though. So.
Well, but then artists are free to be critical of, their own country's actions, too. For sure. So, but I have, it's funny, I have more mixed feelings on whether or not this is, anti-military. And I'll talk about that later. I mean, I think there's stuff there that is, but I think it's just kind of complicated to do anti-war film or TV show is a complicated thing due to the nature of having to be entertaining. But we'll get to that.
Yeah,
soon. We'll get to that soon.
Well, I'm potentially gonna be arguing the flag is not entertaining. So that actually avoids your problem right there.
How dare?
But I say that though, like, and the thing is, I'm not saying that like I would say with other shows where I'm just like with listeners, where I was just like, I don't give a shit.
But you're saying
This is boring,
right? You're saying that that's built into the cake, not that. It's like going for something.
That is. There is a an action quote unquote set piece around the midpoint of the show's run that I will be going through in laborious detail, where I will convince you that it is not entertaining, but it is very deliberately made to not be entertaining, so as to kind of avoid that cool robot problem.
Yeah. I want to talk about that scene later too. I know the one because it's incredible.
And yet it has, again, with a risk of getting ahead of myself here, like, it still really works and has its own kind of tension to it, but I'll come back to that later.
Yeah.
All right, so there's something here that we want to discuss, I suppose, about the idea of this premise being believable.
Yeah, so here's what I mean by that, right? Is that, like, if you hadn't seen the show and you weren't listening to us lay it out for you, but you picked up the back of the box and you read, like, this is a show about a photo of a flag, and that flag's photo bringing two warring sides in a conflict to the negotiating table. I can see someone being like balking at that, right, and being like, "What? That sounds kind of goofy." And I wanted to see if you had that reaction as well, and what your thoughts were about that.
I think it's possible. I mean,
Yes.
When you bring up this question, though, Doc, like, I'm actually reminded of when you and I did Macross Frontier, and we discussed the idea of can music actually change the world as it does in Macross.
Totally, was thinking the same
And
thing.
it's kind of the same thing here.
Yep.
Where I think that it can happen, but I think the required, like, circumstances for it to happen are lightning in a bottle, kind of,
Sure.
where it has to be very specific, very heightened. I mean, I mentioned the Tiananmen Square photo, for example, and I'll grant you that we, of course, have to distinguish between, like, something actually changing as opposed to things happening, which is a different thing, like, because obviously Tiananmen Square didn't necessarily bring, like, the Communist Party, like, more in line with, hey, maybe we shouldn't be such brutal assholes. I mean, Hong Kong, hashtag, let's move on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is possible, but I think it is incredibly rare, and it requires a very specific set of circumstances and a certain kind of, like, as you described it, pressure cooker energy.
Right.
But I don't think it's impossible.
No, me neither.
In fact, like, a big part of what I'm going to be discussing later with my biggest criticism of this entire show is not going to be the fact that I find it implausible, but there are things that don't happen after it that I found to be, like, a catastrophic missed opportunity for this show.
Yeah.
But we will get to that later.
So I think, like, the plausibility of it has actually increased over time since the show was made. I think perhaps back in the day, 15 years ago, you might be like, really? I don't know. But
well, we didn't have social media back then as we know it now.
Right. And so I think looking at it from exactly that point of view, and exactly that mode of dissemination, you can totally see how a photo, a video, a piece of art could galvanize a populace. I mean, America is living through that right now based on...
I was about to mention
based
that
on
exact
an
thing,
awful
yeah.
video, not to equate the two or by any means, but just simply to, I think maybe a better example and a less sort of fraught or charged example would be something that happened in sports a couple of years ago. So people have known for a long time that American football players have issues with domestic violence and domestic abuse. I say that, I don't want to paint all players with that, but what I mean to say is, like, people have known that this is a problem, and people have largely overlooked it. Like, every offseason in football, you'd have various players getting arrested, and it would be reported out in the open. The stories would be in print, but it didn't seem to move people. It didn't seem to charge up anyone, even the league office, right, to get things moving, to get things happening. But then probably, I think it's 3 years ago now, maybe longer or shorter, but roughly 3 years ago, there was a video that happened to get taken in an elevator of a football player knocking his significant other unconscious, just punching her out. And his name was Ray Rice. And that Ray Rice video is what, like, caught fire. People saw it. It was there. The things that you could read about for years about this sort of violence, misconduct, criminal activity happening in sports, particularly American football, and nothing being done. Suddenly, a video is out, and suddenly people care. Suddenly, the commissioner of football is making statements. Suddenly, task forces are formed, and things are starting to happen. Now, like you said, the efficacy of all those things, do things happen? Do changes get made? That's like another question entirely. And about the example I'm bringing up, like you could say, well, not enough has been done. But like in Flag, a piece of journalism sparked something. It got people off their asses, and it got people catalyzed to push for something new, to make a change. And so, like, since we've talked about Macross, like, and could art do it? I think art can, but definitely journalism can also, for sure. And I think it's probably going to happen more and more in our lifetimes.
Yeah. There's something that I've just thought of that I think I should bring up, though, where, while I do think that it's plausible, I think that the event you've described, there's a distinction between that and Flag, which is that the event of capturing that moment with Flag was more an act of symbolism, captured in a single frame. Whereas what you're describing there was an actual act of human behaviour from one person to another.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, of course, that moment of symbolism in Flag is underpinned by human behaviour, because it is a, raising of a flag in a moment like, when the country's falling apart due to civil war. But I think that basically between definitive action versus symbolism, like if you wanted to say that Flag's premise is implausible because symbolism is a harder thing to cause an inciting event as opposed to a legitimate unabashed evidence of like actual human behavior, then I could see you arguing that. But also you've got to then remember that, we are the audience, and while we are actually, funnily enough, seeing footage taken at ground level pretty much all the way through the entire show, we're also not the people living through that particular moment. We have that kind of disconnect. And I suppose in one way you could argue that might be a fault of the show if you don't feel that the premise is believable, because I think it's certainly possible. Like, it's not like, structurally that it could never happen, but it needs to make you believe it can.
Well, the thing about it, the war itself, too, is ideological. And so the fact that a piece of ideology or ideologically charged art in a photo, like, there's some equivalence there, I think, that makes it more... Yeah.
It's gonna vary, but I certainly don't think it's flat out impossible. I mean, we have, as Doc has told, us all here, like, there's more than enough evidence in just this year alone to prove that, capturing a specific moment, a specific point in time with a camera can change things. Whether or not it produces a positive change or a permanent one is up for debate, but also immaterial to the point in question of whether or not it actually works. So, yeah.
Exactly. It's... it's an entirely different...
Yep.
Can it light the fire? And so now I think that we've put our cards on the table there. I think the last thing I want to do before we get into the spoilery discussion is attempt to, like, sell this anime scene again, without going into spoilers. How would I do that, Shadon? I think I would say that if you were looking for something truly unique in terms of its storytelling method, if you really like found footage or documentary if you really like, maybe team, but you want something like more kind of even more real, right? Interested in modern warfare or interested in sort of the setting, then I could definitely like see those as selling points. But I'm just gonna say, like, I just think it's a really great. I mean, but I can see, I think you're gonna bring up. I think I can see it being kind of niche for different reasons that I'll let you go into. But I would say, for my part, that I really, really liked it a lot, and I think it has a beautiful message. I think that it actually moves the ball forward in terms of just sort of anti-war anime, period, and kind of what anime could do, animation can do as far as that goes. But what about you? Like, how would you try to sell this?
I do,
I'm sure
unfortunately.
you have a lot of caveats.
I'm just going to be blunt. I reckon everyone should at least watch the first 3 episodes of Flag. And the funny thing is, if you then actually don't end up liking it as a result of those 3 episodes, you do the 3 episode test and you're just not into it, that's fine, because you'll have still drunk in the actual, presentation, which I think, for me, is the biggest selling point I can make about it beyond any of the actual substance. Because, let's be fair, Doc, I agree with you about this being a good anti-war message, but that's not exclusive to this show. There are other shows that do that and do that well.
Sure.
We mentioned Macross, for all that, that's complete cheese, really. There's plenty of good stuff in it. Or even, I recently rewatched...
I'm not sure I don't know if it's as good at it as what's maybe done here in terms of being I don't know, it's kind of a different thing, but I see what you mean. Actually, though, now can I really quickly, because I realized in our talking about what the show is plot wise, we actually didn't talk about the main inciting event. Because it's not just taking the documentary post this flag thing. The flag actually gets stolen.
Yep. Blue team has stolen the flag.
The UN is...
It's a capture the flag.
Yeah, right.
It really is capture the flag. Just with giant robots. It's CNC
God.
Renegade all over again.
But yeah. Totally. Right? Halo. More Halo
no, that's Command and Conquer. That's not Halo.
There's a capture the flag in Halo.
Yes,
Halo 1.
I was referencing CNC though, because that's.
Oh, my fault. So I CNC not as imprinted on my brain as it should be. Although I did play a fair bit of it. Red Alert, I want to say.
Yes.
Back in the day, multiplayer, LAN. Anyway, so the flag gets taken, right? And so the UN force that Shirasu is embedded in kind of is tasked with covertly getting his flag back and figuring out who took it, why, and getting it back, but has to do it basically without letting the world know that the flag is gone, because this peace process is so fragile, where the place that they are in it, that they're afraid that if the sides learn, oh, the flag has been taken, they might blame each other, and then conflict will erupt again. This whole thing that got them to the negotiating table in the first place being gone, and that is sort of what propels the plot forward. It's not just this documentary of, hey, here are these guys. It is that, but while they're attempting to recover this culturally significant object.
Just to put that in perspective, by the way, folks, the team that Shirasu is a part of, they are being sent in to recover a piece of cloth. Their lives are being put on the line to recover something that you could buy off Amazon. But that's kind of crazy when you think about it. There is just literally a piece of cloth, but it has that much meaning to everyone involved with it, and on which so much rides. It's kind of nuts. It's not...
Well, look, man.
It would be so...
Look at the...
It would be so easy to make
it
something else, they've got the nuclear football. But they don't. It's just instead a piece of cloth, and I think that the show is better for that. That it is something that actually has little material value, but it's the meaning behind it that's where the real value of it lies. Like, I think that makes it much more engaging as a work than, as I say, just simply being like the nuclear football or uranium rods or who knows what, like it.
Yeah, it's not like a Tom Clancy book.
Oh God, it ain't no
mean?
Splinter Cell. Thank Christ.
No, it's like, yeah, I mean, it is about, like you said, ideology and symbolism, and I think that rings true. When looking at the region of the world that this fake country is in, I mean, like, so many wars that are waged there are about immaterial things, like not nuclear footballs. That they're about religion or race or other ideological differences. I mean, like that, turn into, sort of they hit me, so I'll hit them back. But like the kind of genesis of all of it and the thing that buttresses and informs all the reaction and then proactive stuff are those sort of differences of religion and ideology. And I think that, like, setting it up that way again, like, makes this a work that rings truer than, like you said, if it was about something like that.
Yeah.
Like they've stolen a robot.
We've got the virus.
Oh,
that was I mean, that was the plot of Mission Impossible 2, to be honest. So you think I'm crazy suggesting that, like, that's been a thing. Question for you though, Doc. Just don't answer it right now, but just do this for the later discussion though. I don't actually recall, and I have to admit here that I have notes on this show, but it has been a while since I've watched it in full. So, by the way, if I do get anything wrong, then I'm sure Doc will correct me on that. But it is ever explicitly stated, like, the reason, like, is there, like, one side is, like, fighting the other than it's just been a thing that's been going on for so long?
If they do state it, it's early enough in the show that I didn't have kind of the brain anchors to attach the rationale to the side. Like, I didn't even know the names.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I hadn't got a grip on everything.
Yeah.
At that point that they did it. So either they don't do it or they do it so early that I just can't remember.
So the follow-up question to that, and this is the one I want you to stew on for later, is that a bad thing for the show that it doesn't, like, explicitly point out an objectively true fault here, like, one racial group being persecuted by another, for example, like apartheid, that kind of thing. And in the show's fiction, that is, of course. Like, where there's a clear, like, fault that's happened. It's like a clear, unambiguous, like, moral injustice that's caused this civil war to happen. Or
I could answer that now if you want, or we can save it.
Or is it a good thing that the show doesn't do that? Because a lot of conflicts, like, they've gone on for so long that the original point, now seems moot or irrelevant, potentially. I am saying that admittedly as someone who themselves has never been involved in any sort of, like, conflict beyond, like, massively online multiplayer.
You forgot to put mayo on my burger.
Yeah, or that even. So I can't speak for that. I mean, I can imagine that people who've, like, grown up inside, like, I mean, even just closer to my own doorstep, like, if you were growing up in, like, Northern Ireland before, the Good Friday Agreement, I can't imagine what it must have been like, to have lived that life knowing that you weren't getting the rights to, like, independent government that you were demanded for so long, and that, your father had that, your children had. So that in itself could be a point that, like, conflicts is cyclical, even but it's the point where it loses all meaning, but for some people that means it persists. This is the thing, like, I wanted you just to stew on that and answer that. We'll discuss that later, because I feel very conflicted about Dying Flag, like, and that's, I think, is a part of a wider problem I have with it, where it felt like I struggled to connect with this show on an emotional level. But we will get to that in the spoilery specific stuff with the big finale moments. Oh boy, that's going to be a talking point.
Okay.
Anyway, to go back to something about spoilers, though, like, the reason I'm saying about, like, doing the 3-episode thing is because even if you don't care about the story, you'll have at least then got a good slice of the show's presentation, which in of itself is probably the most fascinating and interesting thing about it. And I think that watching this show will make you a smarter consumer of anime, because it'll make you more, or even just television in general, because it'll make you more aware of like how narratives are constructed, because that's literally what's happening in this. You are watching a constructed narrative about someone constructing a narrative, and in turn how the UN, to spoil a little bit, will construct their own narrative to suit their own ends.
Totally.
So watching this show alone, like even if it's just the first three episodes, and you're like, I'm not into it, but you could at least appreciate what it's trying to do, and you'll come away just a little smarter for it, in my opinion.
Oh, I should mention too, like we didn't. Another reason you might want to watch it is if you are interested in the works of someone who I think is one of the great science fiction robot anime directors ever, Ryousuke Takahashi. He has done so many, I think, really worthwhile works for like 3 decades. He was doing work. I don't think he's done very much lately, but like in the 80s, you know, when robot anime was sort of the crown jewel of anime, he was out there making these real robot shows, cool and more kind of grounded in some respects, some of them not so much. But yeah, he just like kept releasing great show after great show. Like, you know, he's got you have Panzer World Gallant, a really interesting show about like what happens when an alien race really violates the Prime Directive. And you have Fang of the Sun Dogram, which is another war story, not a documentary, much more conventional in terms of its storytelling, but I think drawing more on things like Vietnam than the 20th century or early 21st century wars between America and the Middle East. And then you have one of my favorite franchises ever, full stop, Armor Trooper Votoms. Amazing science fiction robot show, like iconic designs, incredible main character, and it just kept going. Like he kept, after that 80s TV show, Takahashi kept making these Votoms OAVs that remained great, really, I guess until the main character of the show stopped being in them. Then they got kind of less good, but anyway, then he made Flag, of course, but before that he made a work that is stylistically more similar to Flag than the other stuff I mentioned, Gasaraki. It's like a super slow burn kind of show about like mysticism and robots. Very
interesting.
Sorry?
Interesting, because you don't have to hear like about mysticism or magic being mixed together with giant mecha, really. So that's piqued my interest already. Like I tend to like keep an eye out. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can name like probably a couple of franchises just on one hand that do that, where they mix magic and technology together in interesting ways, like Shadowrun, for example. But anyway, one thing I just want to bring up about what you've been saying about Ryousuke Takahashi, though, Doc, is that I personally haven't consumed any of his other work whatsoever, but I've heard that he has a reputation, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that a lot of his like robot shows are very dry. Like he doesn't like try and go for spectacle in them. I think
that's unfair.
Akin with Flag.
Yeah, I think that's a bit unfair. I think that is indicative of certainly Gasaraki. I mean, Gasaraki is that is a bounce offable show, but and Flag as well, because of it being kind of going for the slow burn and the slow build over the spectacle. His later stuff, yes, but I don't think his 80s stuff is that really at all. And what is more, like, he also has excelled in his role as like a producer and writer. Like he actually was the head writer for the 1980 adaptation of Astro Boy, which is not dry at all. And he produced, you know, like I said, the man had been doing real robot shows forever, but he was the producer on like certainly the greatest super robot franchise of the show of the 90s, if not of all time, King of Braves Galgaigar. That is a top 5 favorite thing, and he had crazily enough helped produce it. I mean, given the Flag versus, it's like if he had helped do Die Buster. You know, it's that kind of like Galgaigar is so like conventionally super robot and spectacle and bright colors and yelling attack names and explosions, and it's amazing, but it just is just totally the opposite of Flag. But you could feel Takahashi there giving it weight because it's part of this whole universe of shows, these Brave shows, and it's like far and away the best one, and it's because Takahashi's presence, I think, is a big part of it.
Yeah, well, I should mention, like, that even if that reputation were true, like, being, like, dry is not inherently a bad thing. That can be part of what makes a work. And in Flag's case, like, when we get to the scene that we discussed earlier, and we discussed that in more detail, like, I'm going to lay out in laborious detail how that works so well, and how it feels almost like a counter to spectacle-driven mecha shows in a really good way. Like, don't get me wrong, I love my giant mecha that, like, blows shit up. Like, you know, give me the Macross missiles every day. You know, I haven't even seen the show yet, but, like, the Big O's piston punch, we all love that shit.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a place for that stuff. But Flag, like, is very methodical and mechanical in how it does its robot combat, and unconventionally, you would think that's really boring. But I'm going to argue that, yes, there's a reason for that, and it works as a result of that reason, but we'll get to that.
Oh, also, if you like Front Mission, if you like the Front Mission games, like the robotness happening here, like those robots look like Front Mission units, and you get sort of schematics and the different parts of the robot matter, like all that stuff. So I think if you like the Front Missions, maybe that's a way that you could kind of get in here and situate yourself. So you're gonna give it like a sort of hesitant recommendation, like give it a try.
No, I am of the opinion everyone should try it, unreservedly. But this is probably the weirdest recommendation I've ever given, because I can't recommend it for anything like in terms of emotional engagement. I can't recommend it in terms of entertainment as we conventionally understand it.
Man,
that's why I'm saying like.
Okay, no, you go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you anymore. Go ahead.
You really do want to, though. You really want.
Well, I just had such a different experience, like with the emotional engagement. Like I was engaged by the end for sure.
But I definitely, as I say, would recommend people watch at least the first 3 episodes. If you don't then care about what happens in the show in terms of its plot, that's fine. You've got the actual visual motif in the way it's all constructed, and that's the big takeaway. That's the reason that you would come and watch this show, in my opinion. So yeah, unreserved recommendation, despite the fact that I ultimately feel a bit lukewarm on it overall, which is kind of crazy, but that's the way this show works, at least for me personally.
The form seems to have got you more than the content.
Oh, absolutely.
Whereas I would recommend it on both levels, but I think now we could probably throw the shackles off. We could say, hey, from here on,
yes,
we're going to be talking about everything. So if you haven't seen the show and you want to see it, and don't be spoiled on it, like, then stop here and come back later. So let's now talk about the big picture. Like, I think before we get into like the grimy details, like, what is Flag about? Does Flag work? Why or why not? Like, what are your big picture overarching thoughts on the show?
Well, for me, one of the takeaways I got from it was, again, the idea of it critiquing Western interventionism, but also the idea of constructed narrative. Like, to spoil, basically, yes, like Shirasu's team, the UN team that she's a part of with the giant mechs, they do recover the Flag. It doesn't go smoothly, because this needs to be 12 episodes, so if you're expecting to get back in the 4th, then, well, surprise. But they do get it back. But the UN puts a moratorium or a gag order on Shirasu from basically releasing any of the footage.
Shocker.
On her side, anyway.
Yep.
Not a single shred of it will go public.
Until they are going to give it back to her after they redact it. Which is just going to, it's going to be a Swiss cheese at that point. It's going to be hard to
It's all going to be sensor pixelated, like it's just made entirely of dongs, you know.
Right.
That's all it's going to be.
Yes.
But one thing I should note, by the way, this is also another spoiler here, but if you've been paying attention, you might think to yourself, hey, wait a minute. Didn't you say that, that there was a dude narrating this, but then you think to yourself, why isn't Shirasu narrating any of this? I wonder why. And indeed, if you think of it itself like on a meta level, if this footage is gagged by the UN, how come we, the audience, are seeing it? How did it get out into the world? So that in of itself is like a building block of the idea of constructive narrative.
They explain that in the story. How that...
Oh, they do.
Yeah, so like what happens is, like you said, the UN says, screw you, this footage, we're going to redact it and all that stuff. Here are your personal effects now that you've been booted out of the base. And it's just a little note from Lieutenant Chris Eversoft, who is best girl in this show. You might not have thought that I had a best girl in Flag. Surprise! I do. She says...
I didn't even remember her name, I'm not going to lie.
She's the, commander of the operation, and she...
Oh, yes.
There's a reason that everybody is like, I'll run through a brick wall for you, ma'am. And she, I just love her as a boss, how she takes up for her people. She's tremendous, but... she just gives a single one-page note in an envelope to Shirasu that says, your good luck charm's looking a little ragged, isn't it? See you later. And she's like, what? That's it? And she's like, then a light bulb pops on. Oh, and she fiddles with her good luck charm that was in the envelope that they gave back to her, and the unaltered memory cards of her footage are in the stuffed toy. So that is how that Akagi got a hold of all the footage, is because he got those from her personal effects when she meets her sad end.
Yep, she dies in a car bomb as she's about to fly out of the country. Yikes. So much for that peace process, eh?
I know, right?
It was all for nothing. Yeah.
Well,
and so Akagi as a...
I don't know if it's all for nothing, but we'll talk about it.
I mean the peace process. Obviously, the footage got out in the end, and you can then read into the after effects of that however you wish. But yeah, unfortunately, Shirasu is killed as a result. It's not even clear if it was specifically they were trying to kill her.
Yeah, I don't think so.
From my memory. But even if that is the case, that's still pretty tragic. So yeah, Akagi essentially, in the closing moments of the show, is documenting him putting together the footage, and then he releases it out to the world, including his own side story, which is its own narrative separate from Shirasu's. They do converge in the closing acts of the show, literally converge, as in they're in the same physical space. We're going to talk about this different.
But he actually says that he doesn't have any interest in releasing it. He's talking to... So he and one of the... I can't remember her name, but a woman who's a journalist... early on, there's a bombing in the city in one of the earliest episodes, and her significant other dies. And, she and Akagi become sort of closer bit by bit throughout the show. And, he's talking to her with the camera on. And that's probably a thing that... We talked about plausibility. There's some shots in this that you're just how could a person get the shot? Or do you don't think the person you're talking to would notice you left the camera on after they told you to turn the camera off? That's probably...
Yeah, but it's not even filming on your phone. These are literally full size professional
big
cameras.
SLRs. Yeah. But she sort of says what are you up to? And he tells her, I'm putting together this footage. She's like, are you going to release it? He's like, I don't really care about that. I'm just doing it for me. So, but who knows, right? I mean, he could say that on film, but later change his mind. It's all kind of goes to your point about constructing the narrative. Actually, I think.
I mean, we watched it, so if you want to argue about the fourth wall here, it did get out in a sense. In the end.
somehow.
Yeah, maybe he put it on a Google Cloud share or something and forgot to turn sharing off.
He does have the files as separate episodes set up on the PC.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing about this. Like, you think we're like talking like, oh god, it can't be all that into like its own structure, like as in, you know, cameras and stuff. Like the episodes like are literally listed on like this DVD kind of menu, and it goes through all of them sequentially. And then there's a closed down animation like of a camera being turned off. And oh, by the way, all of the shots that take through cameras have all of the appropriate UI elements for a camera as well. So including like batteries, for example, you know, like etc.
I love interfaces. I love them. It's a thing that I like. It's weird, but UI really does it for me. Like, I just love that shit. And so the fact that it's all over the show is it's just delightful to me. I love it that
it's very authentic. It's very authentic. It helps sell it, in my opinion.
And but even like it's not just that he like clicks play on a video and we see what transpires. It's what we're seeing is like recorded footage of him closing down a video and opening up a picture and then talking over it, or like switching back and forth between videos. Like we see on his desktop, like him doing that. Like it's nuts in that way.
It's meticulous. Yeah.
Like he's really pasting together all these threads to get across very particular points.
Yeah. Speaking of which, just one small aside while we're on topic about it. Akagi talking and narrating, like that is an amazing bit of foreshadowing for what happens to Shirasu. Because that's, again, this is why I'm saying about educating you to pay attention to stuff like this, because that clue is there from the beginning. Why is he talking, like, you know, in the past tense over footage of himself talking about the events, but she's not?
Yeah.
Wouldn't he want her involved in this? What's going on here? It piques your interest, and then you find out why, and it all suddenly makes sense retroactively, and you're like, holy shit. It's crazy. It's, again, like, it's a real strength of this show in terms of its presentation and the way it's constructed. But do I want to talk about this now, or do I want to? No, you know what? Let me get the big bugbear out of the way, because I can talk about the actual positive stuff. Like, get the thing that made me grouchy, or like, well, not so much grouchy as it just made me think like, God, why didn't you do this? And then I can talk about the nice stuff later. So here's the thing, right? And Doc, you please do feel free to correct me, because a lot of this hinges on my memory, and my memory is like, you know, a soggy, like alcohol-riddled mess in most of the time. So, but here's the thing that bothers me about this show. I think there's one scene to my memory, only one, where Shirasu like speaks to the camera and tells her, like, no, there's two. Sorry, there's two. There's one at the start and there's one at the end after she's told to get about the gag order. Where Shirasu like talks to the camera alone, like, you know, she sets up and it's like video log style,
right,
about her feelings and how she feels about what's going on. Like, she's upset that she's, you know, like all the hard work of the team, like, you know, trying to preserve the peace process is wasted, and they're not going to learn. You know, like, they're not going to be celebrated as the heroes they are for doing what they've done to save this country. The issue I have is this, and I'll sum it up in one sentence. The show does nothing, in my opinion, with how Shirasu feels about being the person who took that photograph. Like, to me, the idea of I took a photograph, like, just by chance, that, you know, has suddenly, like, massively inspired the peace process. And we don't get any time of her, like, alone talking about it and how she feels, like, about the responsibility it's put on her, or, like, how she didn't want it. Like, I'm just spitballing here. Like, all of this stuff that I feel the show could have included to really, like, make into, like, a deep, like, a big character moment for her, it isn't there. It's such a missed opportunity, in my opinion. Like, that's a big fucking deal that you've essentially become an overnight celebrity and also potentially a target, because you just happen to be in the right place, right time to take this one photograph, and now people are looking at you to do that. Like, and we don't get, like, too much of a look at her, like, you know, thoughts about that. And this then leads into something I'll mention as well, like, because people are going to say, well, but Shads, like, you know, it's a found footage thing. Akagi only had to work with what he had to work with. Not so, because remember, even with a show like this, where it is explicitly constructed in such a way as to be presented as found footage and be as grounded as possible, it's all still the creation of an artist. Not Akagi, I'm talking about Takahashi, of course, and his team. So they could have made anything they wanted to do, for this show. And I think that the omission of, giving Shirasu, moments of humanity where she reflects on, holy shit, I've done this incredible thing. What does that mean to me? Is a massive, massive hole in this show's, enjoyment for me personally. I love character narratives. I didn't have a sense, really, of who she was by the end of this. I struggled with it. And that's why her death kind of rang a little hollow to me in the end. I know that we'd spent a lot of time with her and all that, but, I didn't really know much about who she was as a person. Now, I will say, there was one moment, and this is where I actually believe, you said best girl thing, I actually started doing some shipping in this, because there's a Japanese lieutenant on the team, who's the mech pilot, and there are a number of scenes in which Shirasu, is not actually talking to him, but she's just filming, and this is, I think, a really neat point in the show's favour, by the way, where she spends a lot of time looking at particular people, and that, of course, implies where attention is drawn to, even if she's not necessarily doing professional interview work. And there's a lot of times where she's zooming on this little Japanese lieutenant guy, Ichinagi, and I'm like, is she into him? That's the closest I got to feeling some sort of idea of her being a person, having her own thoughts, wants, desires, fears, etc. And for me, the rest of it just felt very hollow. And that, I think, is the big problem I have with Flag, is that I said I wasn't emotionally engaged with it because I couldn't help but not get past this problem of I want to know what her inner thoughts are. And I'm not even talking about her giving a monologue or anything like that breaks the structure of the show. I'm saying I wanted more video log moments like what we saw in the first episode where she goes, shit, I did this fucking thing. It's changed this country entirely. I don't know if I can cope with that. Can I cope with that? That's just a spitball there. So, yeah, that's my big bugbear with the show. And also, I mentioned about Ferran Martin's review where I agreed with it, but I didn't. That's the problem I had with it. And I'm not saying Ferran's wrong for not mentioning this or that, it's I know better than him. But that, to me, was the point of disagreement more than anything else. Not anything that he actually said, but more that I just thought, I wish there was more character to this. So I open the floor to you now, Doc, to tell me in all the many ways that I forgot about various scenes that actually do that. But hey.
Well, no, I don't necessarily think that there's just a ton of those. In fact, there aren't, with her sort of putting the camera across from her and saying, Captain's log, stardate 4244. These are my feelings. You know what I mean? I think that... So how should I start my rebuttal? I think that I would, sort of misuse a Maya Angelou quote here and say, don't believe someone when they tell you who they are. Believe them they show you. And
I thought you were about to say turtle power.
Yep, that too. Not Michael Angelo, Maya Angelou.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought the mic had cut out.
Oh, that's a funny place for a dropout there. No, Maya Angelou. She said, that believe people when they show you who they are, and I think that this is a top tier anime in terms of the show don't tell style of not just storytelling, but getting to know the characters, because I feel like I do come away with a really great sense of who she is and how she feels about certain things, kind of through not that she ever directly answers your question that you just said, how do I feel about that, but she actually, I think, indirectly you kind of get a sense of how she does based on her arc in the show. I think she clearly does have an arc because, there's a point in the show when that person that you talked about, the Japanese lieutenant, whose name I can't remember,
Ichinagi, yeah,
grabs the camera because he's tired of being interviewed by her and turns it on her and says, hey, do you like this? Why do you take pictures? How do you feel about the person who took the picture of the flag? How do you feel about the flag being stolen? And she's can't say anything because she doesn't know how to react to being the person on film. But you actually see them kind of overcome that rift between them, and you hear her talk about especially at the end, but you see some different stuff of her kind of realizing, kind of coming to terms with why she's taking pictures, and that's to give people hope, right? That like photos and photography, that kind of documentation, can serve as like a lantern. How does she put it? Like that photos are like a prayer, and they're an act of courage in that way. She says they light the way forward with hope for tomorrow. And like, that's why, you know, she ends up staying in Udiana, or intending to, after everything that went on, because she's kind of found her purpose. So we definitely see her grow from someone who I think is just sort of doing a job that she's good at, to someone maybe with some like, she loves it, but she doesn't really understand why. But like, she grows to understand why, and grows to like sort of understand, like, you know, documenting is not just about sort of keeping track of events. It's like getting to know people and showing like these unabashed portraits of them and all this other stuff. And I think, you know, we get character sort of moments from her based on the framing of who she's taking pictures of, and why, and how often, like you said, you know, lingers on different subjects. We see the looks that her subjects give her, and they like, there's a robot mechanic that has a lot of fun with her. They have a fun repertoire. We see her kind of go from an outsider, like she begins this as a real outsider, to most of them, especially like the vice commander, the Asian young woman with glasses, is very sort of skeptical of her too. Like at the end, you feel like their interactions are a lot more like, you're one of us, you know what I mean? And we can tell a lot about her without needing to see like exposition from her, in my opinion. You know, I feel like I came away with a definite sort of sense of who she was and what her calling was and what was important to her, after it was over. And her death, I felt, was really, even more than her death, what stung me is actually that the part at the end of the previous episode when the helicopter of the task force, the team she's a part of, like turns and flies away, leaving her behind in the mass of, you know, UN troops that don't know anything about her. And she's just like, they wash over her like a tidal wave, and she like sinks down into them, and they kind of take her into custody. And it's like, oh my God, like her family is leaving her, like, because they really truly become her family over that time. And that really gutted me. And that hurt, because I think the death, and I'll say in a minute, I think that her death actually serves to make the themes a lot more credible and believable, and what the show is trying to say. Like, it sort of takes away some of the like naivety that you might attribute to the themes of the show. But yeah, I totally didn't have that problem. I felt I knew her really well. I felt I knew like a lot of I thought a lot about the show was actually pretty well realized, and I'll go into that on future points. But yeah, so hard disagree, Mr. Shads. You know,
what a surprise!
I'm just remember the shot of her like you see.
You're asking me to remember shit here, Doc. Like, you know,
like, well,
this is difficult.
Okay.
No, I kid.
Well,
I kid.
There's a great shot of her. Like, I mean, she's always been kind of brave, right? But like, there's this amazing shot of her beside Lieutenant Nikkonen, who he was the one who, he's like the big burly guy who was going to get failure of the flag recovery like pinned on him. He was going to be the scapegoat, but she's next to his Havoc robot, and you see through his interface shots of her just like so caught up in taking pictures and seeing things, like what kind of not really caring about her own life. Not that she's sort of throwing it away, but she's just not even thinking about it. She's so caught up in like sort of capturing these events so that she can create something and so that people can respond to it. Because she realizes how important that is, like, because she's done it with the flag. And that's why, like, I think that this documentary becomes so important to her. In addition to, like, the people in the Subakshi, I guess is the name of the city, the military base close to that, becoming her family. So yeah, man, from a character point of view, I think it does take time to get there. But for me, like, by like about halfway to 2/3 of the way through the show, I was like super invested in the characters at that point. It does take time because it doesn't kind of, like you said, build them up in the conventional way, because it's telling the story in this very different way than we're used to seeing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just speaking straightly for myself here, and I freely admit that, first off, my memory's terrible. And secondly, this is a show that, as much as I said before, like, you know, give it the 3 episodes, like, you need to kind of approach on its terms as well. Maybe I wasn't giving it necessarily that kind of due, but I do stick with my point, because I am of the opinion and the, you know, of the age-old, you know, ancient philosophy of why not both? Why could we have not had both what you've described there and these more intimate moments of her alone talking to the camera as she did before? Like,
I think that would have been
episode.
I feel like that would have been antithetical to her as a person that we get to know, and kind of this what the show was trying to do, because she was there, like, she's not the kind of person that wants to insert herself into her work. Like, she did it at the end because she's saying goodbye to Akagi before going back to Japan, and she has, you know, some things to get off her chest at that point. But, like, I mean, she just doesn't ever do that at any point because it's not her personality. It would seem really weird for her to insert herself into her own work and then just have all that much to say and all these opinions to begin with. Like,
well, I disagree, and I think it actually could gel with the idea of the show, and again, like, constructed narrative, which is, here's how she is in private versus here's how she is with, you know, the rest of the team when she has to put on a face, for example. You can do things with that. So I think it would work with the theme of the show, or one of the themes anyway, and I think it, speaking strictly for myself here, would have made me care. Like, and that's really cold of me to say, but I can't lie about my reaction here, which is that I just didn't feel much of anything towards her or a lot of the other characters, really, to be quite honest. I don't know why. Maybe it is just literally that, you know, I'm not approaching the show on its own terms here, but it just didn't do much for me, and I wish that we had more of those, like, moments. Like, but again, that's just me. Well, maybe I'm talking out my ass. Yeah. Maybe I didn't give it its fair due, its fair shake. But I am's what I am, and you know, if we're to be damned, we be damned for who we are, and I just did not care.
Right.
Well, I think I had a similar reaction, appropriately enough, to give you some more recent context, Doc, like, to how I reacted to listeners, which is, there was nothing strictly wrong with what I was looking at.
Well,
in fact,
there was.
But I just, well, okay, there was stuff wrong in listeners, but what I mean to say is, in terms of, like, like, the way the characters do stuff, like, there was nothing wrong with what we got, but it felt very boneless to me. And that's my reaction to Flag's character side, which I think for me was, like, the big factor in why that I ultimately, as much as I like the show and I like what it was trying, like, it won't stick with me afterwards beyond, like, the academic side of things, you are call it that, where I took away the points, like, about, like, hey, this is neat for how it's constructed, and that's why I was still happy to recommend it on that basis, but I would not personally recommend it, like, if you're interested in character stuff.
Well, yeah, I think, I mean, not every story has to be told the same way, and so, like, this one, this one is not a character-focused story. Like, this is, like, the characters are the form. Like, the form itself is the main character, and then, of course, War. And it is about these people that become her family, and I'm saying, like, these are things I got out of it, but it's because I think the show really does demand your full attention and a lot of engagement and a lot of, like, I guess, I don't want to say this in a shitty way that makes it seem like I'm just smarter or I just paid more attention. But like I really do
that's
think
my job
like,
on the show.
if you are no, I really do think I don't believe that. If you really are just like approaching it wanting like this very kind of typical conventional kind of character beats and storytelling, it's going to leave you wanting. Like you do have to meet it on its own terms. And in my opinion, there are a lot of interesting characters and great character moments that are there for you. But because it's not an omniscient perspective, there's a lot that's like cut between. And, you know, it's not the main character has this personality where she does not want to put herself into this work. That is not who she is. That would be a betrayal of who she is. And the show doesn't want to be a character show. And so the show does not want to overwhelm you with like her opinions and her face in the camera and like, this is best girl, check her out. Like that's
well, you've already decided who the best girl is anyway, so
exactly.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. But I mean, I just think that would just be such the wrong kind of like I feel like if you suggested that to Takahashi, he'd be like, what? Why? That would make it a totally different show.
I thought you were about to say that if I suggest it to Takahashi, he'd like get into a fight with me or something.
He doesn't seem like that kind of a chap.
I've built this robot finally, and I get to use it to silence my critics. Nah, well that's that. Look, I'm ultimately not going to disagree with you in the sense like I think you're wrong. I'm just going to say that I just had a different reaction to it, and yeah, there you go.
So, well, what I think the show is about, I guess, is what I'll transition into next. Like, and I spoke to some of it already. Just that I think the main kind of takeaway, or thematically, probably, apart from like the form stuff and the anti-war. Well, this is sort of an anti-war theme, honestly, but like, I think the ending in particular wants to say, through Shirasu's point of view, right, that like photography and journalism is that hope. I mean, like, there's a lot about like the philosophy of photography in this, that like as soon as you take a picture of something, it becomes the past, and like about how distance between you and your subjects like tells this story of emotional closeness between you, like all sorts of different things like that, and like why you take pictures. But like, I think Shirasu finally realizes in the end, right, that like she loves taking pictures because what she wants to do is like be like this, like have them be like a lighthouse for people, have them be like this prayer. Like she loved that photo that Akagi showed her of a family praying, because she's like, I realize that's what photography, what photos are. They are this sort of prayer for hope for tomorrow, and like saying, I'm going to like look toward tomorrow with courage and face it. And you know, she does die at the end in this car bomb on her way to the airport, and it's very sad, it's very tragic.
By the way, just to mention about the death, I stand by my point that I wasn't affected by it. Like, I can't deny that it was at least executed well in terms of like how it was presented, in that we don't see it really. We see an explosion in the distance, and then Akagi tells about it, and that I think really helps get us into his mindset. Because I'll say this, like what you were saying about like, you know, how it puts things in the past now. Like, this is a past tense story, and like I think that it works with Akagi trying to get across like the pain he feels about Shirasu's death, that he has to now reflect on all of this material being the only thing he'll ever see of her again. Like, you know, that there's going to be no new footage coming from her, like, or even no, like, you know, meetups. Like, so they do meet like at the start of the show, and then they meet at the end. So I think that, like, again, it didn't emotionally affect me, but I can see where to me at least, they did a lot of things right with how it was presented. Keeping it like as cold and clinical as there's an explosion at a distance and she's dead, like as Akagi tells it. Like, it's shocking. It feels like it just kind of came out of nowhere, and that's the point.
Totally.
which works. So I will definitely credit that, even if ultimately, as I say, like the end result didn't get to me. But I can't deny that at least some of what they were doing to me was definitely well executed.
I think if she had lived, it would have ultimately, while I would have left the anime like in a better mood, like I think the themes of the show again could have been then open to like the accusation of naivete, because I think like the fact that, you know, the flag was found and that the peace process has begun, the country Udiana is temporarily at peace, like if it just sort of ended in that way, that would have rang hollow and false, right? Because war, like, and violence are still going to be like clawing at humanity. Like one victory doesn't mean that you've won like the total sort of a conflict or you know, that the opposition of war, hate, violence is now like, oh, we've done it, we have achieved it, we've got it now. That like that's still there.
Well, you
she
know,
was
when you brought
killed
up
by it right after her discovering her purpose, right? But like, I don't think it invalidates like anything that she says or tries to do. Like, I think
no, not at all.
That like human beings like creating things, even amidst chaos or violence or ruin or civilization collapsing, like human beings making things and getting other human beings to like see things and respond to them. I mean, it's how the peace process even took place was even a thing in the first place, because amidst this like situation of, oh, this is never-ending war, this creation, this art, this photo emerges that like moves people forward. And like that, I think, is what it's wanting to say about photography in particular, but about like art, maybe about journalism also in general, that like Shirasu's death doesn't take away from all that, but it shows that like, you know, that it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
And that creation, that people need to still create things and still show other people things to move all of us like forward. Like, and you know, the Akagi, I think at the end is saying like, he talks a lot about 10 million kufuras and her being one of them, like that, you know, Shirasu can't be the only one that's doing this. It needs to go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he himself, like, you know, like actually then, as we understand it, releases the footage because things do need to change. And I should also mention that, again, to bring up the time period in which this was released, it's kind of funny how, like, obviously I discussed, like, you know, about all the stuff like about Iraq and Afghanistan, and yes, they're not the same thing, but the parallels are there. And when you were bringing up like the whole like, hey, it's all clean and done and that's it, well, we, of course, you and I both remember seeing George Bush land that fighter jet with the mission accomplished, you know, banner behind
right.
him.
Yep.
In the which is the second like, which is the second like thing for like the second most prominent thing I remember about Bush. The first being, of course, when that gentleman threw his shoes at him, which was absolutely warranted. Should have been a brick in my opinion, but hey, you know, he had what he had. But nonetheless, like, it's just look at real life and how accurate Flag is about that, in that obviously what followed, even after the show was released, like, is the, you know, like, collapse of security in Iraq, the rise of IS, and so on. So, yeah, I agree with you. I certainly don't think that her... I mean, you and I have had this discussion before, like you just want her to die. Like, you know, like, where I've said, hey, maybe this character should have died at this point. And you'd be like, no, like, what are you? You're a psychopath. But no, I am in agreement with you that I think her death does serve a very strong point. And again, it gels in with the idea of, like, constructed, because, like, Akagi's now, he's asking for out a lot of it, like, what were you thinking? Like, you know, what was going through your head at this time? And funnily enough, I was asking the same question, but not in the way that he was, now that I think about it. Oh, dear. But yeah, I agree with your points on that. That it certainly serves that point, and I think that it's important. Like, you know, I think it goes with the overall idea that Flag has that, again, interventionism from a Western power is usually dubious, morally suspect, or at least, you know, like, is not made with the best of intentions. Because in the end, like, you know, the UN wants this flag back, and there's obviously the risk of life to, like, you know, the soldiers themselves just recover a piece of cloth, which is crazy. Like, we'll get to the temple set piece in a little bit.
And I think, like, I mean, I could see some people saying, like, well, the end is just, like, saying, well, you should give up, right? That there's always going to be bad shit. But I think, like, that it's the reality that there's always going to be bad shit, but I think the ending is saying for us to be vigilant and for us to create in ways that are intentional about showing people bad shit, but also, like, I don't know, just creating beautiful things in general and art to move people and move people away from the bad shit and to create things that we want to create, like the world we want to live in. And, like, I think I would love to have, like, someone, I can't play this game because my computer's not good enough, but there have been a couple of indie games that have come out recently about photography. One in particular seems very interesting, called Umurangi Generation, and it's very much, like, not about war. The war's already happened. Like, it's a post-apocalypse, or maybe sort of concurrently the apocalypse is sort of going on, like society's crumbling, but, like, it's about
in the far off year of 1997.
Yes, right. But these you get a job as a photographer, and kind of I think it's saying some really interesting things that might align with some of the things that Flag is saying in an interesting way. But
I will say that, like, you're saying about, like, how Shirasu dying is a good thing for the story. That I can envision a different scenario in which it wouldn't have been, which it would have been, she had the memory card with her and all of her work was lost in the bombing as well. Like, if that happened and then we basically got nothing and it was just all Akagi trying to piece it this is a completely different version of the show, of course, because like half of the material is hers. But, like, I can see it being done in a way that would have definitely not worked, but it definitely did here in terms of, like, what I was trying to do thematically. I didn't care, but, like, in terms of emotional investment, but I got what they were going for in terms of the themes and the fact that, you know, it works also with the presentation.
They also did that with another character, that young man I mentioned earlier, who is the significant other of the journalist lady that Akagi keeps meeting with. All of his, you know, they show pictures of, like, CDs full of info that are, like, broken apart. And all the information... Oh, man,
you remember CDs?
Yeah, CDRs full of data, yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I know. Like a spindle full that's, like, been destroyed. And, like, so it's sort of, it does, like, the show does, like, point out early on, like, information is not only, like, malleable, right, because look at this whole production here, but also fragile, like, and because, like, there's this instance of it all going to waste. I'm glad, like you, that they didn't do that with her. That would be... It would also be weird because then how would we be seeing the story?
Well, that's what I mean. Like, by it's saying it would be a very different show as a result. But I think it just goes to the point that it's like what I said earlier. It's never, like, inherently a problem to kill off a character. It's the question of whether or not you do it well. And in this case, again, speaking for myself, with that disconnects emotionally, they did do it well.
Tell me a discussion.
Oh, sorry,
I was going to say, tell me your next discussion point, but you're not done. So,
well, actually, I was just about to lead on to that with the idea of disconnects, which is appropriate. So this, again, I think goes into Flag's idea of, like, anti-interventionism, because if you think about it, like, from the moment that Shirasu joins the UN flag rescue team, you know, they're being sent into the other side of facing worlds to go get the flag back. Yeah, there's your Unreal Tournament reference there, getting that out of the way. Like, what we're seeing, though, is that she's spending time with the team. Yes, exactly. Like, what you're seeing there, of course, is her, like, with the actual, you know, team that are doing that. And that's something worthwhile documenting, I would argue, because there's certainly plenty of war crimes in our history. And I'm not saying this is a war crime we're doing, but obviously you need, like, that God, what's it called? That observer position, like where God, what's the word for it? Why can I not suddenly think about it? It's oversight. There we go. You need that kind of oversight. And that's also kind of what journalism. No. Like you need that kind of oversight, going on there. But if you think about it though, like Shirasu, as much as she is trying to capture this particular team's work, the difference between what she's doing and what Akagi is doing is he's capturing the lives of the actual Udodian people. And I think that's really important to note, that for all that Shirasu is doing good work, like she's also kind of unintentionally, at least from her perspective, I think the show's doing this deliberately to draw comparison and contrast. Like she's forgetting about the people whom for this is actually the most vital for.
Well, except for episode 9.
Yes, that's the moment where that comes back. But otherwise,
she stays with those nomads who I can't remember the name of them. They have a particular name, but so really, and the Udiana. This goes to the next point I'm going to make, but like it's they do an incredible job, I think, in Flag of sort of you feel like it's this real place. You have a real sense of place because there's all these different kind of venues that we see and get to know in detail. Like, so Akagi is documenting the city of Subakusu. Like, I think it's the capital. Like, so and that's where, in and around there is where most of the fighting takes place. And, that's where the religious temples are held. So, yeah, I mean, he's got this really important perspective, like you say, but like there are other Udianians that aren't living in that city. And she gets kind of a really big dose of their perspective by staying with them and following around this doctor. And I think that's really the point. That episode is where I started going from appreciating the show to really liking it.
Yeah, that stuff was great with the nomads, don't get me wrong. And I think that, again, there's a point of contrast here, which is that the military base they're on shouldn't even exist here if it's on their territory. Like, it's the encroachment of, like, warfare into, like, the peaceful life these people have been leading.
Right.
So this is not a point of criticism. This is actually, like, saying in favor of the show doing this, because it's so true that, like, journalism, like, while it is about, I suppose, finding a kind of truth and presenting it to the world, you've got to be careful of, like, what you might not be seeing, even, like, in Shirazu's case, where it's currently completely innocent. Because, how many times have you and I, like, throughout our modern, like, our actual history, like, been watching, like, stuff about, say, for example, for Iraq, and we're not getting any actual stories of what's happening from the people down there.
Oh, yeah.
I can't recall the last time I watched a news report, for example, that interviewed a regular person in Iraq, like during the height of, like, IS's power. We in the West, I don't think
I'm
ever
sure they
really
exist,
got that.
right?
You'd have to go to say. I imagine Al Jazeera would do that, but like we don't. We as in the West don't. I don't know why.
Our big,
but that's the thing that Flag is
big corporate media machine was not interested in that.
No, but that's the point, though, isn't it? Like, the Flag's getting across here, which is be careful of who's constructing the narrative, even if they've got the best of interests, because, like, Akagi is showing us the people for whom they have the most at stake here. Like, okay, yeah, there's the professional reputation, like, and livelihoods of the soldiers, like, going requesting this piece of cloth, which I have to keep re-emphasizing, by the way, because holy shit, it's just a fucking piece of cloth.
Right. I mean, you can say the same shit about, like, oh, it's just a building. Like, what, like, I don't know, Israel and Palestine, like, are fighting over, like, a piece of land or, a building. The
West Bank.
Or, like, I mean, from 1,000 feet away, and when you're not kind of invested in the ideology or the religion of, like, the warring sides, like, you could, like, point out that in a lot of times. You know what I mean? You'd be like, oh, like, why? It just doesn't matter. Like, why don't you just move your temple to a different place? Well, it's not the sacred place. Well, who cares? We care. Like, symbolism is so powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
And the show, like, doesn't, like, hide that, like, away from that. But
it does a really good job of developing the religion as well. Like, the interviews that Akagi has with the holy lady that you mentioned earlier, for example.
Yeah, she's so good.
They do it, and that's the thing. Yeah, and that's the thing I'm getting at here, which is I really like how Shirasu like is culpable in this without even realizing it in, you know, the way that she's creating this narrative about these soldiers when in reality, like, yeah, they're doing good work, don't get me wrong, but it's Akagi's like material that like really matters because he's actually talking with the people for whom their lives and their history and such are actually genuinely at stake. Like, you know, they're the ones who have got the most riding on this peace process. Like, Shirasu's got a career, maybe, and then admittedly, you know, she does die, of course, but that being said, like, you know, I think for her, in her mind, it's like, well, you know, I've got to get this right so I can, like, have a career and all that. And I'm not saying she doesn't care, of course, but there's a world of difference between, like, what she's got invested in this versus what the actual people do. And the fact that Flag shows that there's a disconnect between that, between hers and Akagi's narratives, like, is a really, really good way of pointing out, like what I've said about our own media narratives and our own, like, you know, big news corps not giving us the full picture of the people who actually really matter in, like, situations like this.
And they, like...
this is what I'm saying...
Oh, and I was just going to say they underscore the difference you're talking about by, I think, making the styles of documentary different. Like, Shirasu tends to be, like, okay, talk into the camera and tell me about stuff, whereas Akagi takes a lot of pictures of environments and things like that. Like, they both frame things differently. They both like just approach it differently, and that's not an accident, right? It's to show they're distinct people, but also, like you said, to show to sort of highlight and trigger that thing in your brain. Like, okay, yeah, these are different narratives being told here. And I think like maybe one of the most important contributions of this anime is that it's this super believable documentary, right? But like it's animated, so it's easy for us to keep in mind, like it was made, it's constructed, it has a point of view. That's a thing I'm so guilty of, like just forgetting a lot of times, getting caught up in a documentary about real people or a piece of news. Like, it's good to remember they're all constructed narratives. They all have points of view, and they're not all.
Well,
like...
this is what I said when we did listeners and I talked about that Kurt Cobain documentary. Like, even then there were disagreements about the content of it, and also Krista Soviak revealed himself after we did that episode to be a complete twat by saying that Trump was doing a good job, like, you know, handling BLM protests. So that's another band I will not listen to anymore because fuck that guy. Okay, so let's move on to my next talking point, that is. And I want to talk about a specific set piece in the show, which I think is illustrative of how it does so many things right, in terms of at least how it makes the actual lore, if you want to call it that, or the technical specs behind the robots, like, mean something. And also how it builds tension in a way that is unconventional, but still effective, while also delivering an incredibly boring action scene that is also entirely intentional. Like, it's weird. On paper, this entire set piece is dry and uninteresting. But it's like how I remember when I watched H. Guy's video on Pathologic, the 2.5 hour long film epic on how that game like was designed to make you miserable over and over again. And
you mean his last movie that was released, I don't know, what, 8 months ago now?
It was his movie about the plague that was released before the plague. I mean, you know, who knows? But he asked an interesting question in it, and I think that allows me to like Flag more, even though it's not a video game, because if you obviously change the context a little bit, which is, are video games meant to be fun?
Right.
And in that sense, is an anime, or is any television show for that matter, is that meant to be fun or entertaining, rather, by default? And I suppose I should explain the set piece itself so you can obviously have some context of what we're talking about here, and we're not just simply mouthing off about it in a vacuum. So, okay, the team identifies where they believe the flag has been taken, and it's this temple that is set in a giant hill inside of a canyon. So there's no, like, easily accessible path to it. You know, you can't travel down the canyon and then up this hill because, lo and behold, the terrorists have got, like, you know, a number of stationary gun emplacements on there. You will die. If you try to fly in and, you know, be parachuted into the temple, you will die. If you try to approach from the sides of the canyons and then somehow launch, like, you know, zip lines over there, you will die. I hope you're seeing a trend here.
Yes.
So the goal here is what they plan to do is disable some of the anti-aircraft and anti-vehicle emplacements with one of the robots, piloted by the guy who's not Ichinagi. I don't remember his name offhand right now, but it's not
That would
really
be
all that.
Nikkonen.
Nikkonen, okay.
He's
so
the
Nicotine,
one who...
Mr.
God damn it, why did you do that? Yeah, he's the one that they try to pin the operations failure on.
So okay, so Mr. Nicotine, Mr. Cigarette Smoking Man. Sorry, Nikkonen. I'll call him the right name from now on. I promise. So Nikkonen, he's going to be piloting his robot on the side of the canyon, and he's going to be armed with the biggest fucking sniper rifle ever. Like, this is anti-armor class sniper rifle. It's ridiculous. I think, like, if you want a comparable like size of that, imagine the one used by the robots in Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, but twice the size. It's huge.
God's
so he's
sniper rifle.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So he's going to use that to destroy some of the exterior gun emplacements, at which point Ichinagi, in his own robot, his Havoc, or however you want to pronounce it, he will be deployed to land on one of the outside like spiral paths up the hill where his temple is, because the temple's actually inside this hill in a honeycomb of tunnels and such. And he will then pilot it in its vehicle mode, because these robots can transform. No surprises there. And he will head into the central chamber, the central ritual chamber, whatever you want to call it, get the flag, come back out. Everyone goes to, Burger King afterwards for lunch. That's the plan. Verbatim, I promise. It was absolutely Burger King, I swear. No, jokes aside. That's the general gist of it. So you've got a pretty interesting action set piece here on paper, just on the basis of the terrain and the geography alone. And it's all, seems going to be like really, really exciting. It'll be very visceral. It's going to be crazy. Spoilers, it isn't. But spoilers to the spoilers, that's the point. So I'm going to list a couple of things now that I really like about it. So I'm going to start actually with Nikkonen's role in this, because I find that with a lot of science fiction, which is very heavy on the lore, and when I say lore here, I'm not just talking as in like, the history of how events happen, but I'm also talking like how things work. Like, how many wheels does this vehicle have? Can it go underwater? This kind of nonsense like fan stuff that people get really into. I mean, if you're a Star Trek fan, we're talking things like how many decks each ship has, that kind of rubbish, Now, I don't mean to be too derogatory about this, because I think that there's genuine fun to be had in like obsessing over details about how things work. Like, I mean, I recently got Promare's collector's edition for that on Blu-ray, and that comes with a little manual that says like, this thing is built for this and this, and it does this and all that. I'm like, hey, that's neat, that's cool, I like that. All of that's completely peripheral to the story, of course, of Promare, if you've seen that film. But I'm not knocking Promare for that, because I don't want to get lynched, but also,
Why would you? It's an unknockable piece of media.
But that's true. I just don't want, to offend any fans for like coming down it. But anyway, point being, I think, however, there are times in which a work of fiction can get too obsessed in its own minutiae, and at that point it becomes fluff for the sake of fluff. So I think, like, to some extent, Gundam Wing falls a little bit into that, although the reason that I feel that way about Gundam Wing...
Did not expect you to go there. The softest of science fiction that you've brought into this discussion of, like, tendencies of hard sci-fi.
Don't forget, though, Doc, hard sci-fi is about scientific realism. Like, what I'm talking about is just laborious detail. It's different concepts.
That's true, but I suppose, like, the hard sci-fi lends itself to that sort of thing because, I mean, to establish that realism baseline, oftentimes authors or creators will do that. You know what I mean? We'll be like, here is some details and some math equations or coordinates or measurements or whatever for you to understand that this is real or could be real.
It also totally applies to soft sci-fi, though. I mean, Star Trek Voyager,
Technobabble.
Technobabble, that's the one. I mean, there's episodes of that particular show that are just absolutely crammed to the bursting with, complete and utter gibberish that is meant to try and like sell actual drama, and it really doesn't. So I'm hoping to you, the audience, that is, I'm like getting across the idea here that there's obviously, a time and a place for this kind of like immense detail in how things work. I am generally speaking not against it for the sake of like, its own fun. but there are times in which it can smother a work. But that doesn't mean, however, that you should avoid putting in reams and reams of detail when you use it to make a point or to help properly build drama. And it actually does that in Flag, because Mininin's... Was that his name? Sorry, I've already forgotten. I was about to say Mr. Nicotine then.
Just do nicotine. It's okay.
I can't do that in good conscience anymore. He doesn't even smoke from what I remember.
Nikonin.
Nikonin, thank you.
Yes.
There we go.
Or you could call him the head nurse, because he is a officially certified nurse as well.
So nursing. There we go. Okay.
Yep.
Right, I'll stop blending names together. So Nikonin, right? He is obviously going to be taking these shots to disable these emplacements. And throughout the show up until this point, when they've been talking about the Havoc robots, in fact, an early plot point is that these robots have not been deployed in the public, and the UN is actually trying to keep it that way. So Shirasu actually gets her hands on the technical specs of them, I think from Akagi early on in the show. And we get to learn a bit about...
But that's...
Sorry, it's not.
Different details are different, but that's fine. It doesn't matter.
What details? Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm saying, that's we're getting into the minutia of the plot of the show. Honestly, it super doesn't matter, like, the order of things here, but Shirasu has the disc, and she gives it to Akagi. But it's
totally the other way around.
Matter.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'd rather be corrected on that. So we get to learn a lot of the specifics of like how the robots work, and in particular that this gigantic, overcompensating sniper rifle, the robots aren't spec to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
They will essentially break after a certain amount of shots, and indeed a substantial amount of the preparation for this raid on the temple requires Nikonin's robot to be repurposed to use it. But he only gets a certain number of shots, not because he has limited ammunition necessarily, but because it flat out wrecks his robot's legs.
Totally.
So he can't actually,
yeah.
It will. So he can't aim
it will the recoil. I believe the way you explain it in the show is that the recoil will cause the sort of connector joints in the legs of the robot to heat up to a certain temperature that is unsustainable for them to support the robot. The way that they explain it is again, I don't know, just going for this level of hard science fiction realism that I think in Flag is well done, because I don't think that they overdo it. I think that there's just the right amount of it. And also the prep work you mentioned, that they sort of those scenes that they're getting the mechs ready and attuning them to the pilot and fixing them and all of that, those scenes where they often indulge in the opposite of technobabble, right? The talking of the specs and showing of the blueprints. They're there for the nerds, but they're also there, I think, to push home the point I was talking about earlier, narratively speaking, that this kind of early 21st century pre-drone warfare is a lot of waiting.
Mm-hmm. Keep that in mind as we get to another bit shortly, folks, about how the actual raid plays out. But the point I was going to make, particularly about Nikonin's issue here with the sniper rifle, is that they're using this laborious detail to actually build tension in a different way. It'd be easy enough for them simply to say, okay, you've got 5 rounds, don't miss. But no, it's not that. The robot could literally pack in at any time. It helps build this knife edge that they're on to pull this off, where they can't even necessarily do the point of getting Ichinagi into the actual, temple safely. There's a lot of riding on this. There's a lot of dominoes that have got to fall in sequence. And this is an example of where that kind of laborious detail that would either be a bit too dry or a bit too immense otherwise serves an actual purpose in the narrative. So that's the first thing I wanted to say about why that works. So, further context, Nikonin actually does end up getting the, the shots off, but his robot is disabled on the last one, if I recall correctly. Not that matters for him, though, because he's done his bit. So Ichinagi is deployed. He starts circling up the temple and then eventually enters one of the entrances into the honeycomb of tunnels and such that will lead to the central ritual chamber. Now, I'm going to give you a thought experiment, would-be listeners at home. I've described this scene to you, okay? And I imagine you've watched a fair bit of anime in your time, and if you're not, welcome to the anime podcast. It's going to usually start with Flag, but...
The first anime you watched was Flag.
Yeah.
Damn.
It's an unconventional choice, that's for sure.
It's going to be different from here on out.
Yeah. But, okay, so I want you to imagine in your mind how you think this scene would play out. Like, how would it be animated? What would you see? What would you not see? How would it be paced? What kind of soundtrack and sound cues would you get? And if you're thinking to yourself, like, oh, that's a lot to ask, Shads. Jesus Christ, I've not had my morning coffee yet, or even evening coffee, depending on where you are when you're listening to this. Let me give you a comparison point from a film that actually came out after Flag was released, but has an action set piece that in theory works similarly. I'm thinking of The Dark Knight and the scene in the tunnel, where he drives, the Batmobile through and then Joker blows it up, that kind of thing. Similar kind of claustrophobic space, similar kind of vehicle profile, but think about if you've seen that film, and I imagine it's more likely you've seen that than you've seen Flag or any anime for that matter. But anyway.
Unlikely for me.
Yeah. That scene, cuts between Batman, the Joker, the Joker's goons, Commissioner Gordon, the drivers in the actual SWAT truck. There's a lot of exterior shots of all the various vehicles. You've got a generally good sense of where everyone is. There's a moment in which, of course, the Batmobile is destroyed, and then there's a little bit of slowdown, then a pick up the pace again, etc., etc., etc.
Is this the second Nolan movie you're talking about, or the third one?
Yes,
okay, I have seen the second one. I have not seen the third one.
Yes, it is the second one.
Okay.
You don't need to see the third one. Really.
The first two I enjoyed.
Anyway, so I had to because we'll come back to Batman in general at some point in the future. All things circle back to Batman.
Since I've seen them.
All things come back to Batman eventually, and I do have.
Please don't
secret...
say that.
It's true though, and I have secret plans to bring us back to Batman at some point in the future. But that remains, you probably know what I'm talking about, but that remains close to my chest for now. Anyway, so I've laid out at least, I think is a reasonable one-to-one comparison of how you would think the scene would play out in Flag versus how we've seen it play out in that particular film. And indeed, you at home, you may very well have imagined your own way of doing it. And
A Halo level.
Quite possibly. And I'm going to tell you, whatever way you imagined it, unless you've actually seen the show, you're wrong.
You are wrong.
You are flat out wrong.
Yeah.
There is this entire set piece, in theory, should be a blood pumping like action scene. And we see I think maybe on a 50-50 scale, you've got on the one hand what Shirasu is seeing from the helicopter with a lot of UI readouts and like X-ray images and like I think sonar or something like that. The specifics don't really matter. Of the temple showing, right, here on this particular monitor is where Ichinagi is. Here's where the flag is. We see him moving towards it. And then the other half of that, rather, the other 50%, is basically the video feed from Ichinagi's cockpit as he drives the vehicle through. And then we get to see, him eventually emerging into the ritual chamber. So, yeah, this is not in any way, shape, or form a conventionally shot or storyboarded action scene, despite how the set piece on paper appears. I mean, this whole temple raid thing, it could fit into so many different, conventional Western military movies or even, first-person shooters. If you told me that was, if you told me that was the set piece for, a Counter-Strike level, I'd believe you. Because it's certainly laid out what I want. I mean, heck, they're going to capture the flag. Do I need to make any more clear than that? But this, I think, actually really works to the show's favour for, again, building a different kind of tension. Because if you think of it from Shirasu's perspective, and indeed we get to see much of it from hers, we don't see what's going on inside that temple for the vast majority of the time. And because it is that claustrophobic in there, when we see it through Ichinagi's video feed, we don't get to see what's immediately to his left or immediately to his right or even necessarily what's behind him. So for what otherwise, you might think he's in a robot, he's fine. It still feels tense because you genuinely don't have a good sense of what's going on, which I think works in that scene's favour.
Yeah, sometimes they show like an overhead shot, like you said, from inside the command center, where it's like you see the dot that is Ichinagi's Havoc. Suddenly there are a million dots around it, and you're like, oh shit, you know.
It's the alien, you know, I'm crawling through the pipe thing. Yeah. I mean, they didn't obviously. I mean, that's the thing as well why it works in that film, because they didn't end up showing that first time when I forget that guy's name dies. But that's the point, though. You know it's coming, and you feel the tension as a result. And indeed, as Ichinagi like gets to the ritual chamber, he finds out, oh shit, our flag's in another castle. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-bum. Yeah. He got baited, you know, unfortunately.
It's just Toad there. Like, sorry. They switched it on you.
I just like to imagine Ichinagi and his robot just flicking Toad in his face and just sending him scurrying. Like, I'd be pissed if I got there, like, you know, to collect that flag that I've staked my life on and the lives of so many others, and it's just like, hey, sorry, it's in another castle.
And then the Galut, you know, basically are sort of on a suicide mission to stop him. And the tension for me in the scene, like, wasn't like initially like, will the UN force and Ichinagi get the flag back, or will they win? Because like they have the superior weapons, superior firepower. There's a great little video about Flag from a channel called Pause and Select on YouTube. And he brings up this point that like war in Flag, like in real life, is often asymmetrical. You know, there's not really, it's like one side is just so clearly superior, but like they're hemmed in by all these sort of political constraints, whereas the other side might not be. But like the tension for me in this scene was, once I realized that he had to get out of there, like, was he going to make it out in one piece? And you know, he just barely does. And they really bring home the intensity in the latter part of the scene, because he just gets swarmed. And even though his firepower is easily able to like individually, you know, kill all these soldiers, because it's just dudes. It's just unarmed dudes. At that point, they haven't introduced the sort of enemy design mecha, but it's just people with guns.
Oh, snap.
But they're just so many that versus this one guy that, you know, that the Havoc might get captured or he might die, and they end up like destroying the Havoc so it doesn't fall into enemy hands. But
he gets ejected out of it in the end. In fact, they actually block off the exit he tries to use with a vehicle.
Yeah. It's a good scene, man. Even though, like you said, it's like weirdly sort of executed in this totally different way that what we're probably used to.
On paper, it's boring as fuck. But that, again, I stress is part of the point, and that will lead into my final talking point about this.
Can it be boring, though? Like, so you said it was tense.
On paper, it's boring as fuck. Like,
oh, okay, I gotcha. Yeah.
And I can certainly, for example, see someone watching this, and hey, if they feel this way, fair play to them, like thinking, that's it. I don't get to see it up closer, but you don't get the Macross missiles thing or anything like that, for example. But
I feel like that works such in the favor of the story. Where we talked about this. We talked about this for a lot of different anime where, like, sort of not showing heinous acts kind of and allowing the imagination to kind of substitute in the imagery allows it to feel more real oftentimes. So I love the fact that like you just see heat signatures going away or falling down and fading out. Like that makes it feel way more like, oh my god, he's just murdering people. Whereas if they were like, here's like every gory detail, it would like I think diminish that effect.
Yeah. Oh, no, I absolutely agree. So the final thing I want to mention then is also the nature in which the combat happens, and the way I think it will also reinforce the anti-war point that you're about to make, but also in turn kind of feels like a retort or a deconstruction in a sense of how giant robot combat goes in a lot of anime. So here's the thing, right? When Ichinagi is like moving to shoot, or like stops to shoot like people who get in his way in the side of the network of tunnels, all we see is just him, like, you know, through his video feed, casually waving like the minigun that his mech has in the direction of people. They like die in like a puff of smoke that obscures his vision, and then he moves on. That's it. It's a completely, like, again, it's coming through his video feed. There's no, like, dramatic angles. There's no up close, like, you know, look at, say, like, you know, the gore effects or anything like that, or like the impact of the projectiles. There's not even a reaction from him.
Exactly. He's not like sweating or breathing. Yeah.
It is completely cold and completely clinical. That exact same motion his mech makes, you would use if you were air spraying something, you know? If you were trying to, like, you know... Yeah,
that's
if you're trying to, like...
so true.
It's true, like, if I was... it's the exact same motion I make when I'm polishing my kitchen table, you know? And this is the thing. That's the point. It is dry and uninteresting to look at, if you want to put it like that. But that's part of the point, in that this is what war with giant robots would be like. It would be a cold, disinterested sweep of a gun or a weapon that the robot has over the opposing force that you don't even see firsthand because you're looking at through a video feed. So again, further, you know, bring about that sense of detachment, and then you just fall down and die, and you move on. There's no, like, you know, massive explosions. There's no, like, you know, giant lasers. It's a minigun, which I love miniguns, don't get me wrong. They're one of my favourite weapons ever. But they are real, and they're just used coldly to, like, wipe these people out. And like I say, I think that's why, to me, it feels kind of almost like some sort of deconstruction or even, like, response to the standard way in which a lot of giant mecha operate, which is, well, I mean, you and I watched Listeners recently, and that was all lasers, pew, 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 and all that. You know, It was very flamboyant, very flashy. This
Super
is
robots.
not.
Yeah, this is a real robot, decidedly. That sort of show.
It is ridiculously grounded, and for the better, in my opinion, for showing basically what it would really be like. It's like a cold pill to swallow if you've ever been truly into that kind of stuff, which, in contrast with the fact that it's so detail-oriented, like, feels almost crazy. Like, okay, we're going to go into massive detail about how these Havoc robots work, and then we're going to show you them in action, and, oh, brr, done, brr, done, brr, done.
Yeah, I mean, and I say this is a real robot show very casually, but it is really, like, even in that sort of quadrant of shows, it's to the far edge. But, like, oh, God, yeah. I mean, it's everything you're saying is spot on. I had a point I was actually going to make, and now I've forgotten it. So I'm just going to, like, agree with you a lot and pretend that's what's my original intention. Oh, no, I've said this out loud. The game is up.
I've captured your flag, Doc. Sorry, bro. Not getting back now. That's basically... You've lost the lead. Well, speaking of losing the lead, actually, that is basically the end of my talking points for the show prior to us giving up, you know, our summations of it and how we feel about it. So I'm actually going to... I know you said you've forgotten your talking point, but I'm going to...
No, I have a couple. All
right, there we go.
I forgot how I was going to respond to what we were just talking about. And it was a really good one. Damn it. But no worries.
It'll come back to you.
But perhaps. I will talk about a specific scene that I quite liked. And it is combat that happens even before one you're talking about. And sort of to set the scene, I think it happens in episode 3 or 4, but, like, the radar picks up that there is, like, a group of people. They don't know what their motives are, the UN. Like, maybe they're drug smugglers, maybe they're, like, transporting weapons or whatever. But they are coming through, and the path that they are going to take, according to calculations, will take them directly into, like, the area of their secret base, and they cannot risk getting discovered. And so basically, and at this point in the show, we should probably assume that, like, the documentary will be confiscated, because at this point in the show, they're like, look, This is not UN policy. This is not what we do. But yeah, we can't be discovered. We can't. We just can't. So we are going to proactively kill these people, take them out. And they approach this camp of Udianese, I guess would be is the right word, in the dead of night with their 2 havocs, and proceed to, in the very cold and clinical way that you talked about, mow them down. And the way that the scene is directed is chillingly powerful, because there's like a music and stuff in the background as they approach, but the sound just drops out for the gunfire, and you see the bullets drain on the interface as it goes to 0, and you see those heat signatures go away. I think they might do a few shots of sort of the normal kind of outer like camera where it shows the people kind of scrambling around, but the death again is depicted like via heat map, and it is extraordinarily directed. I feel it's really, really a brutal scene, and it is the one time in the show that like at least the one time I remember, Shadon, where afterwards the pilots come home and you see them climbing out of their vehicles and they feel kind of, they look pretty down. They look like the weight of what they have done is really upon their shoulders. And I think I remember what I was going to say now to your point, and I'll just put it in here, is that like I feel that the show, being as grounded as it is, allows it to, while it's still about like a mecha that doesn't exist, it still works as this like really accurate analogy, I think, to what war was then, if not still is, because you could just swap in for the Havoc any old powerful weapon that the United Nations have, that they really do have. Yeah, a tank, right? And you would, and the same kind of, it virtually nothing would change in terms of the aspects of the show that we're talking about just now. But yeah, I wanted to shout out that scene because that scene was incredible. And besides the ending, it's probably one of the scenes that'll stick with me for a while.
Yeah. This show has an incredibly consistent tenor about how it handles the combat, in that, like, as I say, it's cold, it's dry, it's brutal, it's filtered in a sense, because, again, we are denied what we are usually given in a lot of, well, pretty much any television show ever, which is this free-floating omniscient camera. You know, there is an actual diegetic cameraman in the entire show, without a break, without exception, like either be it through someone's actual camera or through video feeds, UI, you name it. So, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that scene. It kind of left my memory, I will admit, but I do recall it now that you brought it back up.
Just the sound dropping out. Oh, yeah. The music, and then all you can hear is just the gun so loud in your ears. It makes it almost feel like you're in the cockpit. Oh,
I should actually just follow up what I said previously about the Temple Assault scene by also mentioning, given what you said about sound, when I mentioned before about Ichinagi like just coldly spraying these people with what must have been hundreds, if not thousands, of bullets, because it's coming through his video feed, it's very muffled, the sound that is. It's very easy for us, I suppose, to talk a lot about Flag's like visual direction, because that's a big chunk of it. But the sound design is phenomenal in it as well, particularly how they try and make it, again, sound very real and authentic, where it is that kind of weird disconnect. I mean, think of it this way, right? Let's say that you were playing this as a video game, that particular Temple Assault scene, or indeed the scene that you mentioned, and you were firing the minigun. Do you reckon as a video game designer, you would have actually then had the muffled like sound effect that you would have had? Or do you reckon they'd have gone full bore and it would have sounded like... You'd obviously have the latter, wouldn't you?
And some HD rumble, for good measure.
Oh, of course, absolutely. Before you go on to your next point, though, Doc, I've actually remembered something else I wanted to bring up, and I'm very glad that I didn't forget this in the end. Clearly, I've got some brain matter left, so that's good. I want to talk about how Flag, like, while it is showing, like, the good virtues of journalism through Akagi and through Shirasu in their own ways, even if Shirasu, like, is kind of under the gag order of the UN in the end, and also how she, as I mentioned before, is kind of disconnected from the real people of Udiana and who's actually really got the most, at stake here. I want to talk about the bar that Akagi visits, because he spends a lot of time in there speaking with fellow journalists. And it's amazing, like, how this show, like, for all that it says, hey, you know what, Shirasu did a good thing by finding that flag, or rather photographing it at the right time. She has inadvertently created a cottage industry of people trying to get their flag moment. And the fact that that's a thing, and it shows, like, these journalists being the opportunistic, almost vultures that they are, kind of took me aback. But it's true. Like, not every journalist who wants to visit a war zone is going to be in it for the right reasons for you. And it was kind of crazy to me how it showed that all these people just at the bar, like, having a drink, waiting for, like, the next things to come down so they go and try and have their flag moment, not realizing that, A, the flag moment that Shirasu captured was just, again, partly her skill, partly happenstance because she was in the right place at the right time, and more pertinently, B, she was legitimately trying to capture the suffering these people are going through and also their emancipation and freedom, whereas the rest of them there are just basically to make a buck, or I don't know, get a top rating on Instagram. It's true. Right. It's true though. Like, it's true how they're all portrayed like as chain smokers and such. Like, they're not portrayed positively in this show. They feel very opportunistic, and I feel very glad that the show kind of rounded out its depiction of journalism by pointing out, okay, our two leads, they are good guys, but not all journalists are in it for the right reasons.
I don't know. I don't know that it... I mean, I'm not sure that it went that far, or at least I didn't read it as sort of like the, the ills of the paparazzi, like trying to profit off of that. Like, I mean, if there's like an international incident of the level that they're talking about, I mean, surely like a lot of outlets would send journalists there to cover it, right? I mean, they're sort of just, I don't know. It doesn't really, and it could be both and. I mean, it doesn't really go into detail on why they're there as much, but like they do kind of have. There's the part, and I've forgotten her name. I've mentioned her several times, but it's the significant other of one of the journalists who died in like episode 2 or 3. Like, she in particular spearheads this kind of like movement among the journalists there at the UN daily briefings to come in harder and ask tougher questions and try to get the truth out of them. And so they're not just kind of there like, oh, well, whatever the fuck. Like, I mean, just take some pictures of these brown people and cash them in, or like try to get this. I feel like they're at least, I don't know, they're like trying to get at the truth. And
not all of them in that bar. Maybe I was coming on a bit strong with my terms then, but not all of them necessarily. But make no mistake, I got the strong impression from a lot of the background dialogue that was there, and also just the general mannerisms of the people in that particular bar, that they were there just so they could do a repeat of Shirasu's stuff, like get their big moment. Which, I mean, maybe focus on like actually highlighting the suffering that people are going through first. You can't replicate that moment forcibly. Even if it was like, something a bit more benign than like, oh, hey, we caught the moment in which there was a glimmer of hope in this horrific civil war.
Yeah, I guess it never came across to me that way. I mean, it's the place they're going to unwind and also to network, and they're people who are doing their job, and they no one can be 100% passionate about their job all the time. The one thing I did really like about the bar, and I mentioned this before, I think, was that like it really helped contribute to like the sense of place that the show cultivated. Like, you have all the, I don't know, there's maybe like half a dozen locales like that got shot. I mean, first it was like, only the military base and the streets of Udiana. But then, you got the bar that you went back to frequently. You got the nomadic people that they visited a couple times, the temple, the stuff with the Kufra. I really felt that Udiana, despite being this fictional place, like, it was so well realized, and the bar really helped contribute to that, because all these spaces were not just like there, like they each kind of told a different story. They each housed different kind of aspects of the country, and each served this great purpose narratively. And so, yeah, I repeating myself here probably, but I think Flag, just the sense of place it establishes is to be commended.
Absolutely. All right, that is definitely the last of my talking points. I have no more. I promise there are no more up my sleeves nor in my non-existent hat. So I will pass it back over to you, Doc, to continue.
Well, I think this is my last question, and it is a question to you. I want to have this discussion.
Oh no!
I forget who said this, and again, this is something I saw in that pause and select video, but a famous filmmaker said that it's impossible to make an anti-war film due to the and I think what they mean by that is due to the nature of film, like having an audience and what that audience expects from a film in terms of being entertained and having characters to follow, and good and evil and arcs and all this business.
Just to interrupt, I've actually secretly Googled it while I'm using my microphone, because I'm a smart boy. I'm learning how to do a podcast after all this time. I believe it's Francois Truffaut.
I think that's right. I don't know who that is, but they said a thing that is provocative and that I'd like to talk about, because we've spoken on here. We framed this as sort of the Gundam problem, because Gundam seems
cool robot.
Yeah, it seems to be like the most well-known property guilty of, claiming to be like, and being at times like this anti-war thing, like, oh, war, it's so bad. Look at how like the people are suffering. Look at how the combatants are suffering, and look at the cycles it puts us into and the damage it does. But goddamn,
now buy our merch. Buy some gunplay.
We're exactly like
consume our products, you sheep.
We just glamorize the machines of war, and like, how cool are they? It's amazing. It's great. How great are these characters who are soldiers? You know what I mean?
Sorry. The only Gundam I've still seen is Wings, so I can't take that statement seriously.
We have to remedy this. Like, it must be like this fucking year. This year,
I know.
We're gonna remedy this. God damn it. So, like, do you think that Flag is? I mean, certainly, I think it wants to be anti-war, and it just has this totally different approach. But do you how successful do you think it is at being a piece of anti-war media?
I think we need to establish some stuff before I can answer this question.
Sure,
and the first thing we need to point out, of course, is that it's a civil war in this show. And if I recall correctly, it was the Rupao, I think it was.
Yes.
What was the Gillot, I think it was?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Trying to seize religious power from the... from I can't remember the sex, like, of the ladies who... one of whom
she's called the Kufura.
Yeah. I believe he's essentially trying to seize control from them. That's as I remember it. And the context, I think, for this is key, because
I don't think like I think the religions play their part in the conflict, but you know what I mean. Like, that is sort of they add fuel to the fire, but I'm not sure it is a religious war per se. Like, I don't like we talked about earlier. They don't really talk about like the sort of inciting incident or the root cause, that you just come into this country in conflict and it's been in conflict, and the religion, the Gelut has sort of at times stoked the conflict because they used to be a death cult. And then the flag doohickey occurs. But anyway, yes. It is a civil war, and then the United Nations intervenes, playing their part in the war.
But this, I think, is the problem, and why I'm going to ultimately side, at least on Truffaut's assessment, at least with regards to flag. Because, call me crazy, Doc, and you're probably going to think I'm a madman for this. I can't be a true kind of pacifist. But I do think that sometimes war can be necessary in very specific circumstances.
Just war theory. Okay.
Well,
let's hear it.
By which I mean, the problem is, the more I think about what I've just said, the more I realise that we could really start drilling down into the weeds of the specifics of when that would be acceptable. It would have to be on a very case-by-case basis.
Sure,
for example, if you're a defender, I think it's within absolute reason for you to go and fight back. No problem there. And more to Flag's point, I think Flag has a critical view of interventionism, but I think the purest idea of interventionism, which is we see a country where horrific things are happening and we choose to do nothing. I think that, there's a reasonable, idea at the core of it that maybe we should intervene. But I'm talking very, very much philosophically and academically here, and I have to say, just to be blunt, the West in general, if it's tried to apply that principle to help people out, in countries where there had potentially or even absolutely been legitimate, war crimes, loss of liberties, the massacring of, ethnic populations, you name it, we have been absolutely
We're very good at this. I know you're going to say we're great. We're the best. We're
fucking terrible. Because either we do it badly, and I'm thinking of what inspired the film Black Hawk Down here, the incident in Mogadishu.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to get rid of a warlord, and that seems reasonable. He's killing a lot of people and all that, but we fucks it up. We fucks it up right royally. I'll bring it back to what I mentioned before with, Iraq. We went there for weapons of mass destruction, which there's only two ways that ended up playing out. Either A, we knew they weren't there and it was a false pretense because we wanted to secure oil or whatever other resources were there, in which case, fuck ourselves. Or B, we had the most pathetically false intelligence imaginable, and in which case, go fuck ourselves.
Or C, both.
Or C, both, yeah. Why not both?
Indeed.
Or why not neither in this case? We shouldn't have done neither, in my opinion. But anyway, so I'm not opposed to the idea as a principle of interventionism, because I think that if there were, just cause to do it in saving the lives of thousands, if not millions of people, I would say do it, but I would just say we've never done it right. If there is a time we've done it right and people want to point out to me, by all means, but I certainly can't think of any from my own admittedly mediocre knowledge of history. So my point really is that I think that if you want to make an anti-war film or an anti-war property, you need to be very specific about what part of war you're being against here. Because I think that making a blanket, anti-war message ignores the time in which conflict is necessary to preserve the lives of, and, even religions, etc. of people. I don't think it's as black and white as no war ever. We're human beings. And
sure. Right. You would agree that most wars, do you agree that most wars that have happened and are happening currently, are not sort of taking place under those justified auspices?
Yeah, I mean, even if we go back to World War II, I mean, you'd think the Nazis were the most unambiguous enemy that we could ever have in the history of military conflicts. And hey, don't get me wrong, they're unambiguously shit. But as part of that, there are obviously a lot of side conflicts that happened and things that, we did. And this is even recent, with people learning that, hey, Churchill was kind of a shithead in his own right. Very sorry there, British patriots. I am not one of you. Move along. So it's never quite as black and white as that. which I'm sure people will quote me out of context on now. So whoops, never mind. Anyway, so
But if it's
no,
look, if it's 99.6% black and only 0.4% white, it's pretty black and white. Come on. Come on.
Okay, yeah. Okay, fair play. But, I mean, in that case, I would say we were, of course, absolutely justified in, firstly, defending ourselves from air raids, and secondly, invading Normandy and taking the fight to them. Of course. So, war, I think, is unfortunately a grim necessity in very specific circumstances. So, okay, long roundabout way of getting back to Flag.
Look, I'm not asking for your personal foreign policy, Shadon. I just want to know if you
Damn
think
it!
If you think this is a successful anti-war, for how successful is it in this goal that it sets for itself?
I'm going to say half and half. And the half that I think it's successful at is the stuff we've discussed about the depiction of the coldness in which warfare and conflict is conducted. Ichinagi casually killing all those people. The fact Shirasu's death, even if you want to count that, because again, it just happens kind of off screen. It's just a thing. There's no dramatic moment to it. She's just a victim. And indeed, that's also, funnily enough, because of the war's after effects, when it's supposedly dying down. And funnily enough, what happened after, the war died down in Iraq and Afghanistan? Oh, I'm sure it was just a joyous time after that, wasn't it? Ugh, fuck me. Anyway, so I think that in terms of let's call it the micro. In terms of the micro of the moment-to-moment battles and showing the coldness of it, I do agree. However, I think the macro level, I have no clear idea why the Civil War is happening. And indeed, some might argue that that's the point. Because sometimes we fight wars for so long, we forget what they were about. A fun fact for you, by the way, Korea and South Korea are still technically at war. They never signed an armistice or anything. That's I think it actually was 70 years recently of continuous open warfare between them, even though they have a border and that's kind of it. I mean, I'm dramatically simplifying over here, or oversimplifying, so I apologize if I've not given that subject its due diligence. But point being, I think for me, in Flag's case, I would have liked more contextual information on what set this off, if there is a right side, quote unquote, and why the faction, as you said, we couldn't even agree on the discussion we had before, if it was a religious civil war, or if it was just, the Geller getting involved to just stir shit up. It's not clear on that. So, half and half for me, the moment-by-moment stuff, particularly the giant robots and the other battles that we see, which are presented as coldly and plainly as possible, showing that just to be an awful affair, and also, as you mentioned, the psychological effects it had on Ichinagi and Nikkinen? Yes, I got it.
You did it.
Nikkinen. Yes, and Nikkinen. I think that works. I also think it's very clearly anti-interventionist, because, make no mistake, even the UN, who you might think are the neutral good guys in this, it's explicitly not America, which I think is a key distinction here.
Right.
Even, the UN are supposedly neutral pie, they have their own agendas in doing this.
For sure.
So I think that it's clearly anti-interventionism, or at least anti-agenda interventionism. But then one could argue, there's always going to be agenda intervention. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
You get my point.
Yep.
You get my point regardless. But I wish that it had given more fleshing out of the conflict's origins, because I think that ultimately, in a civil war, it's not going to be a 50-50 split of both sides. Both sides will be right potentially in some ways and wrong in others. And there could very well be a justified reason for one side revolting, against the government. There's a lot of African history that involves, civil wars and overthrows of governments, only to then, unfortunately, find themselves installing a new dictator in place over time.
Right. Right.
So I wish there had been more to that particular side of it, and then I would feel more comfortable in saying that it's let me say it. I think that it's a successful anti-war story, but I don't think it is a complete or holistic anti-war story, if you want to use those kind of terms.
Well, I think looking at this in a macro sense is probably a mistake. Because I don't know. Certainly the show doesn't want to come
the
out.
micro doesn't happen without the macro, though. That's the problem.
But you can sort of bracket one off, right? And because I think what you might be looking for is like sort of the show to come out and be like, both of these entities were unjustified, or this was the bad guy who instigated it. And
it doesn't.
I
No,
mean,
no, 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 no.
I just think
no.
Okay.
Let me set the record here. I'm not asking it to categorically state in the show's own text which is right and wrong. I'm asking it to give me enough material so I can come to that decision as a viewer.
Okay, but I'm just saying I think that is unnecessary to the point that it is trying to make. I think like consider like again, just meet the show on its own terms and consider. Just we're trying to do, I think, is and you could just disagree with this, right? That like, I think the show is trying to say that like causes of war, and war being like state kind of violence, right, against another entity, not which is different from violent protest or it's other forms of political violence organized by individual citizens, but like this sort of state-sanctioned violence against either a group of its own citizens or like another country or another government or whatever. I think the show is saying like the causes of it, like, don't think about that. Think about the toll that it takes on the actors that have to play a part in it, both the interveners and the citizens of the countries, and think about like the costs involved. And I think the show is saying the costs are so great that like there's nothing in terms of the cause of the warfare that can justify that level of cost. I think this is what it wants to say, right? And again, that is something that you can freely take issue with, because you may anybody out there may feel like there is a justifying reason that can justify all the death and suffering that will come about with war. You know, the grim necessity, as you put it, right?
I think to answer your point there, Doc, what I'll just elaborate on is, I'll give the show this much credit, though, in saying that it manufactures in its own time frame, never mind the actual origins of the war, like a thing that they have to collect that, as I mentioned before, on paper is completely worthless. They're going after a piece of cloth, which I think is really, really neat. Like, it's not, for example... Let's say, for example, in another alternative version of this story that does not exist, let's say that Shirasu didn't photograph someone behind a flag. Let's say she photographed someone in front of, I was about to say a statue.
A grail.
Well, they've all, a grail, a statue, a holy relic, you name it. Something with known, established historical significance in the show proper. Then, you know, I think that would have actually taken some of the edge off the message, which is these guys are being sent in for a flag. A flag that may or may not even, like, you know, solve the issue that they're trying to, you know, it might not even gel the peace process together in the end. Spoilers, it doesn't actually, because Shirasu fucking dies. Oops. Well, which actually, now that I think about it, makes her loss actually do ring a little with me, because I think it was all for fucking piece of cloth. Shit.
Yeah,
Ugh.
right? I mean, that's sort of the other side of the intervention, the interventionism is like, you know, you have this like neutral third party looking at the conflict, and you know, because it's someone like ostensibly from our shared culture in terms of like global values and things like that, not like we're not Japanese obviously, but like we're able to like look at it and go like, damn, this is fucked up. And because we're not like in it, and we're not Udanese or Udianese, however anyway, you get my point.
Well, I think that the Udianese in themselves would think that it was fucked up, though. Like, I think we need to be careful about like delineating like that only we would, as a Western perspective, would get that this fucks up. And this also, again, is why I think that part of me would wish that I'd seen more of them as a people. But again, I'm going to start... I feel like I've got to stop myself, because otherwise I'll start backtracking into stuff I've already discussed about the idea of, you know, like, okay, this show is obviously from Shirasu and Akagi's perspective, and it's got more of a justification than most shows for doing that, because it's literally through their cameras or whatever video they've been given. But again, like, you know, this is written by someone who's real, and these people are not. So it could have been whatever they needed to show off the story. I'm not going to bog us back down in that because we've already been through that. It's well trodden earth at this point. So yeah, I think respectfully
some Udianese might have thought it's stupid, but clearly enough of them did not that they're like, I mean, it's like the war that they're having is an ideological one, and like, you know, when evidenced by the fact that like the religion, even if it's not like the root cause, like it's playing a huge part in it, like it can stop the ceasefire or not. And so like this flag as it materially empirically piece of cloth, but like to the people that embrace the idea, it's like a very important symbol, such that the UN believes it's such an important symbol that if it were to be revealed as missing, it would destroy the peace process. I don't think that's an ill-founded belief on their part.
So I am okay with the idea, like, you know, hey, this flag's piece of cloth. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But I think that I'm going to respectfully disagree with your point and say that it's not that I can't even answer one way or the other, like how I feel. I mean, obviously the Death Cult, that I've got no like shades of grey on how I feel about them.
Good old religion.
You know? Yeah, the Brotherhood of Nod basically just running around in this particular game.
Right. But then you have the other side of the coin where you have the different religion that seems to be quite peaceful. But anyway, that's neither here nor there to what you're saying.
Yeah, and as you say, like if this is why the Civil War is, and we have to mention if, like, this is speculation and I wish it was more concrete, like if it was like, you know, different factions, like why are they doing it would be nice to hear. I mean, let me just put it this way, Doc, to give you some kind of real world perspective here. Like, I know in both Iraq and Iran that there is a dividing line along Islamic religion between Sunnis and Shias.
Sure.
That's as much as I know. And granted, it's my own ignorance that I haven't sought out more information on this, and I probably should do after this podcast is over, so I at least then can answer it later. But I can't recall any time that I've ever seen on a news report that's discussed this division and this, like, you know, divide between different areas of those countries. What the distinction is, why it's like, you know, they're fighting internally, etc. all this time, like why there is such like tension. And the thing is, when I bring this up, I'm not even saying Flag needed to necessarily like give us its own objective answer on the divisions between the two factions apart from the religious sects. You know, it could very well have said, you know, gone into like, hey, I want to find out, but then we don't learn because no one will talk to either Akagi or Shirasu about it. But at least then I could have come to some sort of judgment. Like, I could have made my own call on who I thought, from my perspective, was right or wrong. And since I can't do that, I can't ultimately conclude on an anti-war sentiment, at least as far as the wider conflict goes, and therefore I don't think ultimately it works in that way. But that's not the same thing, I should stress, as me saying this is not anti-war because it glorifies the, you know, cool robot meme, that kind of thing. It's very much not that. So to me, it's a partial success as an anti-war message on the grand scheme of things.
I just disagree that you have to make a determination on whether the sides are just or not, because I mean, I think the show is saying that they're not. Like, I think the show is saying, like, look at what this is doing to everyone, and no possible reasons we could give will make one side or the other, even if they're right. Like, even if this is why I'm pretty down on war. Not a big war guy here, because even if like you're right, like in your reasoning or justified, like, I mean, who cares, I guess, when it comes to you know, the suffering that will be visited upon the actors in the war,
the citizens of in the theater of war. I mean, it's just, and then someone will lose, I guess, and then the loser country, like people that had nothing to do with the war, will suffer from that loss for a while, economically or whatever. And so I think this is just part of what it's trying to say. But I haven't really talked about whether or not I think it's successful, right? I mean, I think
Yes.
I think this is tough because while I do think that the show definitely shows that like war is a thing that allows people to coldly kill each other, and even the people that do the killing can be traumatized and affected. Like, it nails that stuff. But it has the robot otaku in there. The mechanic, it does have a few like, isn't this robot fucking awesome moments that I guess you can't avoid.
I mean, if we go back to the whole Digestic argument here, like, and what I said before about the reams and reams of detail, even if the reams and reams of detail are being used to build up those tension moments that I mentioned, that still doesn't, like, nullify the criticism of, well, there's still the reams and reams of detail there that people can obsess over.
Sure. Yes.
It's,
and I don't want to.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing because I don't want to say, well, if you're like an otaku for that stuff, if you're a big nerd of robot, bullets or guns or whatever, then you're pro-war, because that is garbage. And there are people that love robots and like other sort of wartime, bomber planes or tanks or even firearms, right? That like are would not support war or that kind of violence, as sort of oddly contradictory as those two things may seem. I mean, I think there are plenty of examples of that in the real world. Go ahead.
If I may add to that, you're absolutely right, because the thing is, like, fiction can often be a safe space for us to, like, not even necessarily commit acts, but more engage with the viewing of acts that we would never want to be, involved in firsthand. Like, let me put it this way, right? For all that I've said, like, hey, like shows like Macross Frontier, Berserk, Land of Lustrous, Penguin Drum, you name it, like any good show that I love, like the vast majority of them, I would not want to be there firsthand.
Yeah.
Absolute vast majority. But that doesn't mean I don't love those shows and don't want to engage with them. And for that same reason, I think that, okay, I can argue the toss all I want about, well, okay, this reams and reams of detail are a problem. But if you're at least critically minded enough to recognize that, to avoid the cool robot meme and say, okay, look, I like all the detail that's in this, but I never want to see something like it in real life. I never want even to know that it exists. I want it to remain a fictitious thing. Then I think that's fine. I think that's acceptable. Of course, we then can make the argument that the show still needs to have some sort of angle in order to like make that clearer for the people who might not be, as savvy, shall we say. But I think that, the dryness of the combat itself, I think, does that well enough. If you're coming to this show trying to expect, like, some crazy, like, robot-on-robot action, you will be sorely disappointed. And all I can hope is that if you are sorely disappointed by that you take a moment to reflect on why. Granted, you are now listening to the end of the podcast where we've explained our reasonings for thinking that, but, I mean, maybe you came in very late. What can I say? But you get my point nonetheless in that, it's still fiction at the end of the day, and as long as you're critically aware of that, and don't want, like, the Havoc robots to become real, or any sort of, like, ill-fated, ill-intentioned bullshit interventions and nonsense, or any other stuff, then that's fine. Like, the show, whether or not I believe it's successful and so on, doesn't ultimately mean that, it's going to define your perspective. You can still be anti-war regardless of that. You can come into it anti-war, come out stronger for it, Hopefully not less. That would be a bit awkward.
that would be, I gotta feel Ryousuke Takahashi would scratch his head at that. Be like, really? You're more into war now?
Yeah.
But yeah, I and I love robot on robot action. So I mean, I'm freely admit that stuff is super rad, and I don't want to be like a purist about this, right? That like because there's the presence of very niche robot otakuism that like it's all for naught, throw it away, it's not anti-war, like because I think it gets the balance is so tilted in favor of the anti-war messaging that I think you gotta like applaud the show, because it definitely pushes that narrative harder, or rather pushes that theme harder in its narrative than plenty of other shows of its ilk.
Oh yeah.
But here's I think maybe a sticking point that I've come to because I watched the show in 2020 and not in 2006, right? This is a tough one because the show definitely is, I think, all about, like I said, showing the horrors of battle and war. I think it's anti-government, at least anti-bureaucracy, because the UN get dicked around, and you have an organized religion, potentially fucking over the whole country. So it seems pretty down on a lot of like pillar institutions that like you have sort of powerful people being petty and looking out for themselves at the cost of, the UN force or the nation of Udiana or whoever. But in an era where people are talking about defunding and abolishing the police, and then also having discussions about defunding the military, I think it is worth it to think about, like, is the show maybe a little too, like, saccharinely pro-troops? And this is, like, the hard thing when making an anti-war movie, because you need these characters. But, like, then... Yeah. then are you gonna...
I'm stroking my beard at this, because the more I think about it, like, there's not a bad apple in any of the soldiers that we see in Shirasu's team. They're all likable individuals. And the funny thing is, like, that, I'm not saying that's the fault of the show necessarily, because I think that's the point. That this particular group, they're, just doing their jobs, and it's a shitty job they've got to do. But yeah, like, not all. Unfortunately, I mean, there's a long history of, like, abuse by soldiers again in Iraq, for example.
Totally.
All sorts of things like that. And okay, maybe we shouldn't be trying to put the burden of and maybe this is much to my own point as it is to yours here, Don. Maybe we shouldn't be trying to put the burden of being a holistic anti-war thing on any one work, never mind Flag. It's a lot to ask.
Yeah.
For a 12-episode show. I think, rather, my answer will be that I'm still going to call it a partial success, but It is just one piece of the larger puzzle of an anti-war education, if you want to call it that, like where you consume that kind of media. It's a strong part of it. But to presume any one work on its own can completely and utterly, like, cover all the bases is absolutely unrealistic.
Totally. And this is...
I mean, as complicated as any given war is in itself, so too any given anti-war message will be equally complicated.
Right.
Right. What was his name again? Truffaut. Like, he said it's impossible to make an anti-war film. I disagree. I think it's impossible to make a perfect, all-encompassing anti-war film. But as you said about how Flag leans into anti-war, like, I think that still means that, like, works of fiction can lean on that and be definitely net anti-war overall. There's degrees to this. I think it's not a binary thing, where it either is or isn't. Like, it can have elements of it, and indeed, part of critical analysis that would be interesting would be the whole cool robot thing, where, as you say, this is anti-war, but buy our shit. And incidentally, I don't think Flag's selling merch of its own robots. So it kind of dodges that bullet.
No, but there's another bullet that I think it doesn't dodge, and that's okay. I mean, I wouldn't call Flag problematic, but like this is why I talk about that enjoying and engaging in problematic media is like fine and good, because there's often like good stuff there as well. Like, not everything, you shouldn't throw out everything, right, that doesn't measure up to the 100% purity test, because then over time, every piece of media will be found wanting if enough years go by, right? Because everything's a product of its time. We all have our like biases and things like that. And I think Takahashi might, like, his one here seems to be like, you know, you made this clear to me when you were talking about No Bad Apples. I mean, it seems like he has this kind of good cop sort of narrative he wants to push about the military. Like, it feels like, you know, you have them saying things like most soldiers are fighting to protect something, right? And things like that, that kind of like glorify and put on a pedestal, like, you know, look at the sacrifices that these people are making. Like, you know, maybe they only feel something when they're in battle, but like they're here for noble reasons, like, and they just like, I mean, get deployed into these bad shit situations. And like you said, like that is so often not true and can like really obscure some horrible abuses that happen in the military.
I mean, if I may also quote the famous philosopher Barrett Wallace from Final Fantasy VII Remake, you know, I believe he says something to the effects of, you know, even a good person working inside an awful company is still responsible.
Right.
I don't know if it's a power hole for its sin. So even
they're complicit
in this work, they're still complicit. Even in all of this, like the soldiers in that group, Ichinagi, for example, all of the others, they're still complicit in the UN, like, you know, doing its shit, trying to get hold of like this fucking flag. And then, of course, the gag order and all that, you know. So, yeah. But, yeah, partial success.
I think so.
B plus.
Yeah.
B plus.
I think, like, you know, it does it as well as any other anime I've seen. I can't think of an anime that, at least to my knowledge, like, does this sort of thing better and so grounded. Like, maybe like you could come away from like a certain sort of fantastical anime or science fiction show feeling so strongly that war is bad, but like, I don't know, this one hits you in this way because like this is some real shit, you know?
Yeah, and it's not even just because it is set in what is like, you know, a real world environment, like, or what looks like one, like, you know, it's an approximation of a Middle Eastern or even like, you know, Western Asian city. It's or even country, rather, I mean to say. It's again because of all the ways in which it depicts it at the ground level.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just as simple as context; it's also conveyance that matters as well.
Totally. Well, that was a fun discussion. Right. That was very fascinating.
That was indeed. And I'm going to say that I'm very glad we're doing it in this form. I'll admit this publicly on air, even though I could totally edit this out later. But I'm actually very glad we're doing it this way instead of the way I had originally planned to do this, where it was just me talking into a microphone for an hour. Because I think we've had a more engaging discussion as also of you and me playing off of each other, Doc, rather than simply me, right, script, read, done, boom, beer. That's totally my recording process. But anyway, yeah, this has been a cracking discussion. I'm going to just quickly round out with some final thoughts here, which is that your mileage may vary. Like, I keep saying this, and it's the most rote, like, you know, bullshit ever, really, because it applies to everything. Like, your mileage may vary with vanilla fucking ice cream, you know. It's you know, it's true of everything. But the reason I bring it up is because, again, I talk of, like, the degrees to which this is relevant. Like, either you like vanilla or you don't. Or maybe, you know, you can't eat regular vanilla for very... Like, I'm not going to get bogged down with that shit. Point being, like, me and Doc, as we've discussed, like, it had quite different reactions, emotionally, that is. I think we're of a similar-ish mind to the other elements of the show. Feel free to point out where I'm talking crap about that. But, like, we had disagreements about the emotional response, which is to say that I'm dead inside, and Doc, you know, was, like, quite moved by it. And I'm not putting my own perspective down here. I can only speak from my response to it, which was, But your mileage is definitely going to vary on this show. But as I stated before, and I absolutely must stress and state again, watch at least the first 3 episodes of it. If you don't ultimately end up caring for the story or the characters, you've at least got the aesthetic and the presentation. You've got that. And that to me is key, because I think that Flag should be required viewing for anyone who's an anime fan, or even not necessarily an anime fan. It's grounded enough that, you know, you could get anyone really to watch it, you know, like, I mean, there's no like shonen power-up bullshit or anything like that. There is no hard work and guts, and this is one of the few times in which I would say that's a good thing. So yeah, I would very much recommend everyone give it a try, just because, as I say, I think you'll come out with a little more of an appreciation for the way filmmaking, animation, you know, storyboarding, and how narratives are constructed. And that's just simply from the way it's made, not anything to do with the story itself. And if you end up enjoying the story and want to see the rest of it, great, go do that. I'm very happy for you in that case, like, because, as I say, I ultimately had no real reaction to it, but that's just me. And if you get, you know, if your move like Doc was, that's fantastic. So yeah, absolutely do check out Flag. Give it at least a free episode go. And even if you quit the free episode, you'll still get something out of it. I promise you that much. All right, so that's the end of my talking points and overall summary. So, Doc, how did you ultimately feel about Flag in the end?
Well, I really liked it. I mean, way more than I thought I was going to, right? Even a couple of episodes in, I think. Excuse me. I think after one or two episodes, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what's going on in my throat. I'm sorry. I'm thinking to myself after one or two episodes, okay, like, I get what they're going for. I respect the technique, you know, of what they're doing.
You had a very Shadon opinion.
Yeah, right. But I didn't, I wasn't invested, you know, and that's by design of the show, as we've talked about it. It's a very slow burn. And, you know, the show, it asks more of you than a lot of shows do in terms of that sort of thing. Waiting on it for action, waiting on it to kind of slowly build its characters. But over time, I found myself getting really wrapped up in it to the point where I was really, really into it. And I thought the messages were really good. I think that just the form of this anime. Like, it's so interesting that Takahashi tried this so late in his career too. I mean, he'd been directing anime and writing it for decades at this point.
I just need to add, like, I cannot imagine this being made today. Or maybe possibly, but
It's a tough
I feel
one,
like the
though.
odds are
Yeah.
I feel the odds are against it, because make no mistake, for all that I can say, like, watch this show, and even as one of the two of us who has the lesser opinion of it, like, I cannot see this being conventionally appealing, if you follow my meaning.
Oh yeah, no,
I can't
not going to be a crowd pleaser.
No, absolutely not. And given, like, how much at this point anime is driven by the need to be crowd pleasing, because, well, welcome to capitalism, motherfuckers. It always comes back to that, doesn't it? It's always fucking capitalism. Jesus. Anyway, because of that, like, I can't imagine it being made again today. But, like, as you rightly state, though, it was still a gamble even back then. I mean, go back to how it was released. It was on pay-per-view, online, in, what was it, 2005?
6, 7, yeah.
2006, 2007. Like, I can't imagine the audience for it must have been that big, just by merit of the delivery method.
I know.
On TV.
I know.
It's crazy when you think about it like that. It's a gamble on many layers, which is crazy. But, like, hey, whatever I might ultimately feel about it, kudos to him for doing it. I'd rather have shows like this made than, like, conventional, boring isekai trash.
Sure. It's yeah. I think if you're the sort of person who does, like, enjoy the riskiness, right? Then that will appeal to. I think that appeal is there. Like, he's definitely going for something totally different than any anime before or since. And it's really neat to see this in animation, this style of thing. And I think it's really an additive. Like, you know, you might be thinking, oh, like, well, found footage or documentary. Like, why did they not just make this live action? Like, why not do it that way? I mean, I've seen that before and it's effective. But I think animating it really does add something to the whole production, the whole mix here. Experience is the word I'm looking for, because like we talked about, like, it allows you to kind of watch it and feel extra removed, so you're kind of have that, like, doubly in mind that this is a narrative being constructed, and in that way it's very sort of instructive about documentary filmmaking and all that sort of thing. But anyway, these are all very academic points. I really dug the show a lot. I love the robot. Even the Havoc, I think, is so cool. Like, I can't remember the other robot, but that one really looks front mission-y. We didn't really talk about, like, the CG. Did you have issues with the CG? Because it's mid-aughts anime CG. It is what it is.
Not really.
I didn't either.
I think a substantial part of the reason why I didn't mind was because we had the framing device of the cameras or the video feeds, so you can kind of write off the lack of fidelity as being a part of the fact that we're getting it through a camera or a video feed of the side. It's like you've got film grain on it and such,
Right.
So I think that ultimately, overall, no, it didn't bother me. And yeah, I mean, Christ, I think I'm getting flashbacks now of fucking Vexil, that film I watched way back when that was released, if I'm not mistaken, around the same time as this one.
I think so.
And oh boy, that was, I believe the working title for the rendering file for that film was uncannyvalley.mp4. Ugh.
Yeah.
Jesus.
07, I think. But look, I also didn't have the big issue there because maybe because of what you're saying too. I didn't think about that, right? But something about the way that the mecha blended into the backgrounds, I don't know, really made it super inoffensive for me. Like, I mean, they still look like PlayStation 1 mecha the whole time, but, like, in this way that I just did not find like jarring.
No, no. It was fine.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. But this show rules. Like if you've been listening, you know that I think it rules, and you know why. So
yeah,
watch it. I think it's worthy of like you said, sampling to see if it's your thing.
Yeah. So basically, you've got from me a recommendation for it as homework, and then you've got the cooler recommendation, which is watch it because it's really, really good in its own right. So I'm going to put that as a 1.75 out of 2 recommendations.
Right.
There.
Right. I think
that'll do. All right then. Well, with that concludes our discussion of Flag. I want to give another shout out to David, aka NavyCherub, for his immense patience with this. I again apologize profusely it took this long to get round to it, but
man, we're going to be doing this every time. If you apologize, we're going to have to do this for every request.
No, we'll run out eventually. It'll be fine. We'll get back to it. But come on, we've got to be honest with ourselves here, you know, and to our audience. I mean, they're putting their time and literally their money into us, so it's only fair.
Oh, I know. Just consider this a deep apology from us, covering all the sins of the previous way we structure the requests as we go through them.
I would bow, but I ended up banging my head on my keyboard, so I don't want to do that. Plus, you can't even see me do it anyway, so all you hear is a big funk noise. And I'd rather not give myself, brain trauma right now. Nah. Anyway, thank you very much, David, for your patience. I'm hoping that the end product actually will have been better than the hypothetical one I would have come out with on my own. And indeed, I'm looking forward to doing more of this format with Doc, where we cover our individual requests together regardless. To our other patrons, I want to give you my immense thanks, as always, for your financial support, your actual support in, just being fans of the show, being fans of the podcast, being a part of our Discord and helping being a part of our wonderful community. And for when this eventually comes free to air, if you're a shillster or whatever, I kid, of course. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this as well, particularly about a more obscure show that might not necessarily pique your interest or one you may not even be aware of. But I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've gotten something out of it, and we will be back, I believe, in 2 weeks' time to cover Barakamon, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. That is the preemptive thank you to Mirror on the Wall for calling the request line and getting into the secret phone booth and all of that sort of thing.
Indeed. And speaking of which, if you want to get into the secret phone booth and also get yourself on some other patron rewards of ours, including a couple of our patron-only podcasts, get yourself into our Discord, get your ability to, join in with our group watches, ask us questions about the shows we're covering as we cover them, all sorts of great stuff like that. Get your web browser, fire it up, unless you're on Netscape Navigator, in which case you're fucked, and then head on over to patreon.com/warriedesho. Have a nosy over there. You can get yourself on the $2, $3, or $5 tier.
So
see
affordable.
What you like. Absolutely. I was almost going to start leading into this, for a low monthly price, and doing some payment plans and stuff. But we're not a 1993 American drug advert, so we'll skip that. But thank you very much to everyone for listening. I've been Shadon, and he's been what was your name again? I won't see now.
Nikkonen.
And thank you very much to Mr. Nicotine for his contribution. Obviously, I'm referring to Doc. Yes. Thank you very much for helping us, Doc. It's been an absolute pleasure doing this one. Even if we did disagree, I'm glad that we did, and I'm glad we also had a good chat about it as well. So I'm hoping that you've all enjoyed it as a result as well. He's totally wrong though. I kid. All right. And on that rosy note, we'll leave you to it. We'll be back in 2 weeks with Barakamon and all of our other good content. But as we often say on this podcast, embrace you, everyone. To the ends of the universe, and have a very good night.